The first light of dawn stretched across the slopes of Mount Silene, spilling soft gold over the dewy grass and the quiet hills. The air was cool and fragrant, carrying the scent of wild thyme and delicate mountain flowers. Even in this calm morning, a subtle anticipation lingered, as though the world itself sensed the arrival of something new, something small yet destined for movement, for mischief, for messages yet unspoken. In a modest cave nestled between gentle ridges, a mother stirred. Maya, daughter of Atlas, lay quietly on her soft bed of reeds and woven cloth. She was careful not to make sudden movements, yet her heart hummed with both excitement and tenderness. For today, her child would be born. The faint sound of her breathing mingled with the rustle of the wind outside, and as her hands rested upon her rounded belly, she whispered softly, "Come into the light, little one. Come and see the world." Hermes emerged quietly into the world, tiny and fragile, yet his eyes, dark and bright, held an energy that seemed far beyond his size. Even before his first cries, he looked around the cave with a curious, attentive gaze. The shadows that danced across the walls of the cave seemed to ripple in recognition of his presence. Maya felt a gentle shiver of awe, sensing that this child carried something different, something extraordinary, though she could not yet name it. The baby's fingers flexed, curling around the soft cloth of his cradle. He lifted his head just slightly, and his gaze met his mother's. In that moment, it was as if a quiet understanding passed between them. Hermes was aware of the warmth, the comfort, the safety of this small world she had created. And yet, even in that first connection, there was the whisper of wanderlust, of movement, of journeys yet to come. The hours passed slowly in the dim light of the cave. Birds began to stir outside, singing their tentative morning songs. A gentle breeze filtered through the narrow cave opening, brushing Maya's hair and carrying the scent of pine and fresh earth. Hermes, though just an infant, responded to these subtle movements. He turned his tiny body toward the wind, his small fists grasping at the currents as if trying to catch the invisible threads of the world around him. Maya smiled softly, a mixture of wonder and quiet concern. Even in these first hours, she could sense his sharp mind, his quickness, and his undeniable restlessness. By midday, the cave had warmed under the sun. Light pooled in corners, highlighting the smooth stones and the soft mats of moss that Maya had gathered. Hermes lay on his back, staring upward, his little legs kicking gently. He cooed softly, a sound that seemed almost melodic, and even in its simplicity, it carried the spark of a voice that would one day move between gods and men alike. Maya hummed to him, her voice blending with the distant murmur of a nearby stream. It was a gentle song, a cradle of protection, but it could not contain the energy that hummed through him. As Hermes' gaze wandered across the cave walls, his hands found a small cluster of reeds lying near the entrance. With surprising coordination, he grasped one and brought it to his lips. It was instinctive, exploratory, a touch of curiosity mingled with the tiniest hint of cleverness. Maya watched quietly, a mixture of amusement and fascination rising within her. Even now she realized this child was not content to simply rest or follow. He wanted to discover, to understand, to move. The cave remained tranquil, yet outside, the hills and valleys seemed almost to lean closer, as if eager to witness the early movements of the infant who would one day traverse them with unmatched swiftness. Birds alighted on nearby branches, their heads cocked in quiet attention. A small fox paused at the edge of the grove, sniffing the air, sensing the peculiar presence of this child. And within the cave, Hermes continued to stretch, to reach, to touch, absorbing the textures, the sounds, the light of his new world. By late afternoon, Hermes' first bursts of energy grew more insistent. He wriggled, then rolled across the soft mats with surprising agility, eyes scanning the space as though searching for something unseen. Maya laughed quietly, feeling both delight and the faintest exhaustion. Even on his first day, he exhibited the restless spirit that would come to define him. There was a cleverness there, a mischievousness that seemed to ripple through his tiny frame with every breath, every blink, every curious movement of his fingers and toes. As twilight approached, the golden light of the setting sun filtered through the cave entrance, casting long, gentle shadows. Hermes, now partially tired but still alert, rested against his mother. His tiny hand brushed against hers, and she held it softly, feeling the delicate pulse of life. Yet even as sleep threatened to draw him under, there was the subtle twitch of fingers, the flicker of eyes, the awareness that this child's mind would not rest for long. There were the quiet stirrings of adventure, the first whispers of journeys, messages, and footsteps that would one day cross both mortal lands and divine realms. Maya tucked the soft cloth around him, smoothing it with careful hands. "Rest, little one," she whispered, "for tomorrow will be another day of wonders." Hermes' eyes fluttered, then closed briefly, yet a gentle smile lingered on his lips. It was a smile that spoke of curiosity and cleverness, of a spark that would never fully dim. Outside, the stars began to appear, one by one, twinkling faintly above the mountains, as though nodding in quiet recognition of the newborn, who would one day move between their light and the earth below. And in the calm, lingering quiet of the cave, with the soft sounds of night settling around them, Hermes slept. Yet even in sleep, there was a subtle tension in his small body, the slightest twitch, the faintest movement of hands and feet. It was a promise, unspoken but unmistakable, that the child who had come quietly into the world on this gentle morning would grow into one who moved with purpose, with cleverness, with a swiftness and intelligence that would touch both gods and mortals. The mountain night deepened, the wind whispered through the pines, and the stars shimmered with patience. Inside the cave, Maya rested, her hand still resting lightly on the sleeping Hermes. And even as the first chapter of his life came to a close, there was a sense of anticipation subtle and serene, that the days ahead would carry journeys, discoveries, and quiet adventures, all waiting for the boy whose eyes had first opened to the light of Mount Silene. The morning light stretched across Mount Silene once more, delicate gold spilling over the hills, over the curling leaves of olive trees, and into the quiet cave where Hermes had slept. The air was cool and soft, carrying the scent of fresh dew mingled with wild thyme and the faint aroma of distant pine. Inside, Hermes stirred, tiny eyes blinking open. The first rays of the sun touched his face, warming his cheeks and making his dark eyes glimmer with curiosity. Even in these earliest hours, he seemed aware of everything around him. His tiny hands flexed against the soft mats, fingers brushing the moss and woven reeds with exploratory wonder. He shifted slightly, listening to the distant hum of the mountain wind, the song of a bird flitting between trees, the gentle trickle of a stream winding its way down the slopes. Every sound, every movement, every texture seemed alive to him. A soft coo escaped his lips, small and melodic, yet there was an unmistakable spark of attention in his gaze. Maya watched him with quiet admiration. She had not slept deeply, but she hardly minded. There was something about the child's energy, his cleverness even now, that made the night feel short and luminous. Hermes lifted his tiny legs, kicking gently against the soft mats, then wriggled forward with a surprising fluidity. He had learned quickly in his brief hours, testing his strength, exploring the space, gauging the limits of this new world. Maya's fingers brushed his hair, and she felt the electric hum of life in him, a tiny thrill that suggested both mischief and brilliance. Hermes' attention soon turned outward. The cave entrance framed a view of rolling hills, bathed in the pale light of morning. He reached toward the opening, tiny fingers grasping at the air, yearning for what lay beyond. His toes curled against the soft moss, balancing his small body, as though preparing for the first of many journeys. Maya noticed his intent gaze and leaned closer, her voice gentle. "Be careful, little one," she whispered. "The world is wide, but it is kind to those who move gently." Hermes blinked at her and then let out a soft laugh, a sound like the ripple of a mountain stream, full of curiosity and joy. By mid-morning, Hermes' cleverness began to reveal itself in ways both surprising and endearing. Nearby, a cluster of small, smooth pebbles lay scattered on the cave floor, carried there by streams of rain from days before. Hermes reached for one, then another, stacking them carefully with astonishing patience. He tilted his head, eyes narrowing in concentration as the stones teetered on each other. When one fell, he gently nudged it back into place, hands working with the delicate precision of someone far older than his hours. Maya watched, smiling, recognizing the first whispers of the skill that would one day make him a master of cunning and movement. Outside the cave, the mountain life continued quietly. A pair of birds hopped from branch to branch, their feathers glinting in the sunlight. A small fox padded through the tall grass, ears alert, sniffing the morning air. Hermes' gaze followed them, a quiet fascination in his eyes. Then, with a small, determined squeal, he wriggled forward, inch by inch, toward the cave opening. His tiny hands found soft earth, feeling the cool texture of soil, the tickle of grass under his palms, the faint crunch of tiny stones. Each sensation seemed to excite him, and he paused often to press his face closer to the ground, breathing deeply and taking in every detail. It was not long before Hermes discovered a small, broken branch near the cave entrance. He grasped it with both hands, examining it as though it were a treasure. He tapped it lightly against the stones, listening to the different sounds it made against moss, earth, and rock. Then, in a sudden burst of curiosity, he began to move it, pushing it gently along the ground, noticing how it rolled, how it caught in the grass, how it changed direction with his small nudges. There was a rhythm to this exploration, a quiet, almost musical playfulness that seemed to echo the soft sounds of the mountain itself. Maya sat nearby, her eyes soft with amusement and awe. She had always known her son would be clever, but even she could not have imagined the speed with which he learned, the awareness that he carried in his small body. Hermes paused for a moment, looking up at her with a thoughtful expression, as though he were aware of her presence, her encouragement, and her quiet, loving gaze. Then, with a sudden giggle, he turned back to the branch, pushing it again, experimenting, testing, discovering. As noon approached, Hermes' small adventures began to extend beyond the immediate cave. He crawled to the edge of a gentle slope, peering down at the grasses and flowers that swayed in the mountain breeze. He reached out, touching a blossom, feeling the smoothness of its petals and the faint roughness of its stem. The scent was delicate, almost sweet, and Hermes inhaled deeply, a faint smile playing across his lips. His fingers lingered, brushing against the soft textures, tracing the contours of leaves, discovering the world through touch as much as through sight. Then came the first true indication of his playful cunning. Near the stream, a small group of tortoises moved slowly across the rocks. Hermes observed them silently, eyes narrowing in quiet calculation. With a sudden burst of movement, he darted forward, gently nudging one with a fingertip. The tortoise withdrew into its shell, and Hermes laughed quietly, the sound mingling with the burbling of the stream. He tried again, tapping the rocks with a pebble, listening to the small echoes, marveling at cause and effect, delighting in discovery. Every action, every reaction, seemed to spark a new thought, a new idea in his tiny mind. By late afternoon, Hermes' curiosity had led him even further. He found a narrow path winding up toward the higher slopes of Mount Silene. Slowly, carefully, he climbed, tiny hands gripping rocks, toes pressing into soft earth, body swaying but balanced, steady. The wind lifted his hair, brushing his cheeks, carrying the scents of pine and mountain wildflowers. From this vantage, he could see the valleys below, a patchwork of green and gold, a quiet river twisting through the fields. The world was vast, and though he was small, Hermes' gaze was full of intent, full of wonder, full of the quiet understanding that one day he would traverse these lands with ease and grace. Evening fell gently, bathing the slopes in soft amber light. Hermes paused at the summit of his small climb, chest rising and falling, tiny body glowing in the fading sun. Maya called softly from below, her voice warm and inviting, and Hermes responded with a small wave, fingers brushing the air as though signaling across a tiny expanse of land. Slowly, he descended, careful in his steps, aware of the textures beneath him, the gentle slopes, the soft rustle of leaves and grass. By the time night settled over Mount Silene, Hermes was back in the cave, resting on the soft mats, breath slowing, eyes fluttering closed. Yet even in rest, there was the quiet, barely contained energy of a mind that would not stay still for long. His small hands twitched occasionally, as if reaching for unseen paths, unseen journeys, unseen messages yet to come. Maya watched him, heart full of quiet wonder. Outside, the stars began to shimmer, one by one, across the mountain sky. The wind whispered through the pines, carrying the faintest hint of distant lands. Hermes slept, but in the gentle twitch of fingers, in the faint smile upon his lips, there was already the promise of movement, cleverness, and discovery that would shape not only his own life but the world of gods and mortals alike. And so the first full day of Hermes' life passed, filled with quiet exploration, gentle adventure, and the beginnings of the mischievous, clever spirit that would grow in time to cross the boundaries of Earth and Olympus with ease and purpose. Tomorrow would bring new paths, new discoveries, and the first lessons that would teach him not just about the world around him, but about his own boundless, restless mind. The early morning light painted Mount Silene in soft shades of gold and lavender. A faint mist clung to the valleys, curling around the trees and rolling slowly down the slopes. The air was crisp, carrying the delicate scent of mountain thyme and fresh earth, mingled with the faint sweetness of morning dew on flowers. Hermes stirred from his sleep, stretching his tiny limbs, eyes wide and alert, already scanning the cave and the world beyond. Even in these earliest hours of his life, he seemed unusually aware. His hands flexed against the soft mats beneath him, fingers brushing against moss reeds and pebbles that still lingered from the day before. A quiet coo escaped his lips, melodic and light, full of curiosity and delight. He rolled onto his side and reached for a small, smooth stone, turning it over in his tiny hands with careful attention. Every curve, every texture, every weight intrigued him. Outside the cave, a small rabbit hopped along the slope, ears twitching. Hermes' dark eyes followed it immediately, a soft giggle escaping him. He reached for a nearby stick, gripping it with surprising coordination, and began to gently prod the ground near the rabbit. The animal froze for a heartbeat, then darted lightly through the grass. Hermes laughed again, delighted by the simple game of cause and effect, and reached for a pebble to toss gently in the grass, listening to the subtle crunch as it rolled along. Maya, still near the entrance of the cave, observed quietly, smiling. Hermes' cleverness and attention to detail fascinated her. Though only a day old, his mind seemed to move with a precision and subtle playfulness that felt beyond ordinary infancy. His small body wriggled with energy, rolling toward the cave's opening, eager to explore the wider world. Maya spoke softly, brushing his hair back from his forehead, but he barely noticed her voice. His focus was already on the life around him. Hermes crawled carefully to the edge of the slope, feeling the texture of the soil and grass under his palms. Tiny blades tickled his skin, and he paused to press his face close to the earth, inhaling the gentle scent of fresh growth and moss. A butterfly fluttered nearby, delicate wings painted in shades of soft orange and blue. Hermes reached for it, fingers grazing the air, then watching in fascination as it lifted higher, carried by the wind. The movement made him giggle softly, a light sound that echoed faintly across the slopes. As he continued his exploration, Hermes discovered a cluster of small tortoises near the stream that wound its way through the hillside. Their shells glinted faintly in the morning sun, smooth and patterned like the rolling hills themselves. He observed them carefully, head tilting from side to side, eyes narrowing in thought. Then, with the quiet precision that already marked him, he extended a tiny hand and tapped one gently. The tortoise withdrew into its shell, and Hermes laughed softly, delighting in the simple reaction. He tried again, nudging another with a pebble. It rolled gently across the stones, bumping lightly against the shell. Hermes' eyes widened with satisfaction, and he clapped his hands softly. The animal's movements fascinated him. Each small interaction became a puzzle, a source of gentle wonder. Hermes was learning, even in these first days, to observe carefully, to experiment, to test boundaries without fear. By mid-morning, his curiosity led him toward a small grove near the cave. The grove was quiet, the air fragrant with pine and the faint sweetness of wildflowers. Sunlight filtered through the branches, creating soft patterns on the ground. A bird perched on a low branch, chirping faintly, its tiny wings rustling. Hermes crept forward slowly, body low to the ground, eyes tracking the bird's movements. He raised a tiny hand, then paused, reconsidering, then tapped a small stone to see if it would catch the bird's attention. The bird flitted upward with a startled chirp, and Hermes laughed softly, a sound like water trickling over stones. Even in these small interactions, Hermes' cleverness became more apparent. He began to notice patterns, the way a stone would bounce, the way animals responded to touch or sound, the way sunlight highlighted certain paths across the forest floor. Each discovery seemed to excite him, filling him with a quiet energy that made him wriggle, roll, and crawl with renewed purpose. Maya watched, fascinated. She understood even more clearly now that Hermes was not an ordinary child. His mind moved quickly, gently, and with a subtle cunning that promised great things in the days to come. As the day stretched on, Hermes' movements became more ambitious. He climbed small rocks, balancing carefully with tiny hands and feet. He explored narrow paths along the hillside, feeling the textures of bark, moss, and stone beneath his fingers. The wind brushed against his cheeks, carrying scents of pine, flowers, and earth. A small fox appeared at the edge of the grove, ears alert, and Hermes froze for a moment, watching with quiet fascination. The fox sniffed the air, then trotted away, leaving Hermes clapping softly in excitement at the encounter. By afternoon, the playful cunning of Hermes began to show even more. Near a patch of soft grass, he discovered a few small fruits that had fallen from a tree. He reached for them, turning them over in his tiny hands, noticing their textures and shapes. Then he gently tossed one against a stone, watching it bounce and roll. Each movement created a sound, a rhythm, a subtle game. Hermes laughed quietly, delighted by the interaction of cause and effect, the small surprises hidden in ordinary objects. Maya approached him carefully, kneeling beside him. "You are clever, little one," she whispered, brushing a strand of hair from his eyes. Hermes looked up briefly, eyes dark and bright, then returned to his play, hands moving quickly as he stacked stones, nudged twigs, and rolled fruits across the grass. Every movement carried a sense of purpose, a subtle intelligence that made Maya's heart swell with quiet pride. As evening approached, the soft golden light of the setting sun bathed the grove in warmth. Hermes paused atop a small rise, chest rising and falling as he observed the valley below. The mountains stretched endlessly in the distance, rivers glinting faintly like silver threads, forests swaying softly in the breeze. He pressed his tiny hands to the earth, feeling the textures beneath him, sensing the pulse of the land in ways that seemed far beyond ordinary perception. There was a quiet satisfaction in these first discoveries, a gentle understanding of the world's rhythms and movements. Night fell slowly over Mount Silene. The sky deepened to shades of indigo and violet, and the first stars appeared, shimmering faintly above the mountain peaks. Hermes returned to the cave, tiny limbs tired but spirit bright. He nestled into the soft mats, brushing his hand against the smooth stone he had carried from the grove. A faint smile lingered on his lips as his eyes fluttered closed. Even in sleep, there was the subtle tension of curiosity, the quiet spark of cleverness, the gentle twitch of hands and fingers that hinted at future adventures yet to come. Outside, the night air was cool and still. The wind whispered softly through the trees, carrying the faint fragrance of pine and earth. The stars glimmered above, as if acknowledging the tiny, clever child sleeping below. Hermes' first day of exploration had ended, filled with gentle discovery, quiet play, and the beginnings of a mind that would one day move between worlds, guiding messages, clever tricks, and swift journeys with grace and intelligence. And in the quiet of the cave, Maya rested near him, hand lightly resting on his small shoulder. The world outside was vast, full of sights, sounds, and mysteries, and Hermes would meet each one with curiosity, cleverness, and the soft, playful joy that would come to define him. Tomorrow promised new games, new observations, and the gentle unfolding of a spirit that would move quickly, think cleverly, and explore endlessly. The morning mist had barely lifted from Mount Silene when Hermes stirred once more. The soft light of dawn filtered into the cave, brushing against the mossy floor and gentle stones, carrying with it the faint scent of wild thyme and pine. The air was crisp, the soft hum of the mountain awakening, and Hermes' dark eyes gleamed with the restless curiosity that had marked his first days. Even as an infant, Hermes seemed drawn not only to discovery, but to experimentation. His small fingers brushed against pebbles and twigs, testing textures, weight, and balance, a quiet intelligence guiding every movement. Today, however, there was a spark in him that went beyond mere exploration. Something playful, clever, mischievous stirred deep within his tiny frame. He rolled to the edge of the cave, eyes glinting, and observed the slopes below. Somewhere across the valleys, in the early light of the sun, lay herds of cattle grazing quietly. Hermes' attention sharpened. The sight of the cattle fascinated him. Their broad bodies shimmered in the sun, their hooves brushing the grass, tails swishing lazily. A faint breeze carried their earthy scent, and Hermes wriggled forward, hands grasping the soft earth as he inched toward his first deliberate adventure. Maya, busy tending to small tasks near the cave, glanced at him with a soft smile. She could see the glimmer in his eyes, a mixture of curiosity and determination. She did not yet understand that her son's cleverness was already taking its first steps toward legendary cunning. Hermes approached the cattle quietly, small hands pressing into the grass as he inched closer. He observed them carefully, noting their patterns and habits. A sudden twitch of his fingers, a quiet shift of his weight, and he tested the limits of what he could do without alarming them. A few cautious steps forward, a gentle brush against a fallen twig, and the sound barely rustled the quiet morning. Hermes' lips curved into a tiny smile. He was learning cause and effect, experimenting with movement and sound in ways that felt natural and effortless to him. By midday, Hermes had managed to nudge a small rock against the ground, creating a faint clatter. The cattle lifted their heads briefly, then resumed grazing. Hermes clapped softly, satisfied with the result, and then tried again, nudging another rock to see how far he could send it without startling the herd. Each small success seemed to thrill him, reinforcing the spark of cleverness that had always been present in his young mind. With patience unusual for a child, Hermes began to move carefully among the cattle, using small paths between the grass and stones, observing how the animals reacted to his presence. The scent of the earth, the warmth of the sun, the soft rustle of leaves in the gentle wind, all of it guided his movements. He crouched low, hands pressed to the soil, body balanced and ready, and in that quiet, deliberate way, he began the first act of what would become his famous mischief. Hermes reached a small calf at the edge of the herd. It was calm, its dark eyes reflecting the light of the sun. Gently, he pressed a tiny hand against the calf's side, feeling the warmth of its coat. Then, with careful nudges, he guided it forward. The animal moved with surprising ease, following his subtle coaxing. Hermes laughed softly, a delicate melodic sound that mingled with the rustling leaves and distant bird calls. He felt the thrill of his first success, a quiet pride in his cleverness and subtle control. The afternoon sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the slopes. Hermes continued his quiet mischief, moving cattle carefully, almost imperceptibly, down narrow paths that led away from the herd. His movements were deliberate, measured, guided by instinct and a keen awareness that seemed far beyond his days of life. Each small step required patience, observation, and subtle cunning. The mountain, the breeze, and the soft earth beneath his tiny hands seemed to cooperate, guiding him gently as if recognizing his cleverness. By evening, Hermes had managed to gather a small group of cattle away from the main herd, leading them through narrow passes and hidden trails. The soft sound of their hooves against the grass and stones mingled with the whisper of the wind, a quiet music of mischief unfolding under the attentive gaze of the mountain. Hermes paused often, crouching low, observing the animals, making sure each movement was smooth, careful, unnoticed. His dark eyes sparkled with delight. There was a rhythm to this quiet adventure, a gentle excitement in every small success. At one point, a curious goat wandered near the edge of his path. Hermes watched it carefully, gauging its reactions, then gently nudged it aside with a pebble. The goat skittered back, and Hermes' soft laugh echoed lightly across the slopes. Even in this small, subtle trick, he reveled in the learning, in the effect of his cleverness on the creatures around him. Each interaction, each gentle manipulation, seemed to awaken a deeper sense of purpose within him, a growing understanding of how his mind could shape the world around him, even in quiet ways. Twilight approached, bathing the mountain in shades of amber, pink, and violet. Hermes led the last of the cattle through a narrow pass that brought him close to a secluded valley below. The animals moved quietly, guided by his gentle nudges, their hooves brushing the soft grass, tails flicking lazily in the evening air. Hermes paused for a moment, chest rising and falling, small hands brushing the soil. He observed the valley, the distant hills, the fading light, feeling a quiet satisfaction in his success. It was his first true adventure beyond simple exploration. His cleverness had allowed him to move, guide, and experiment, all while remaining unnoticed, all while enjoying the subtle thrill of mischief. By the time night fell, Hermes returned to his cave, small limbs tired but spirit bright, eyes gleaming with excitement and wonder. The stars above shimmered faintly, reflecting in his dark eyes as he nestled into the soft mats. Maya approached, her hand brushing against his hair, and Hermes' tiny fingers twitched in response, restless even in sleep. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines, carrying faint scents of earth and wildflowers, echoing the quiet mischief that had unfolded on the slopes. And as he drifted into sleep, there was a sense of calm satisfaction in his small chest, a gentle thrill of cleverness and discovery, the quiet pride of one who had already begun to understand the possibilities of the world. Even in rest, his mind twitched with ideas, gentle plans, small experiments, and soft laughter that had not yet faded. The mountain night deepened, the stars watched silently, and Hermes, though small and still, had taken his first step toward becoming the clever, swift, and mischievous messenger who would move between gods and mortals with ease and grace. Tomorrow promised new discoveries, new interactions, and the first gentle stirrings of the cleverness and cunning that would make him famous across Olympus. The mountain slept, the wind whispered, and Hermes rested quietly, small but already extraordinary, dreaming perhaps of journeys, animals, and the quiet mischief of another day. The dawn on Mount Silene was gentle, a soft wash of gold and pink across the ridges. The wind whispered through the pines and olive trees, carrying the faint fragrance of wildflowers and fresh earth. Hermes stirred in his small cave, eyes fluttering open, still filled with the quiet thrill of yesterday's adventures. His tiny fingers twitched as if recalling the delicate steps, the soft nudges, and the gentle herding of the cattle. There was a spark in his eyes, a restless energy, eager to explore further, to learn more, and perhaps to test the limits of cleverness against a world larger than himself. As the sun climbed slowly, its warmth spilling across the slopes, Hermes emerged from the cave, small feet pressing into the soft, cool grass. The mountain seemed to welcome him, its shadows stretching in gentle patterns across the earth. The stream nearby murmured quietly over smooth stones, and birds flitted through the branches, their wings brushing the air with delicate whispers. Hermes moved toward the path leading down the slope, each step measured yet full of anticipation, aware that the world extended far beyond the immediate cave and grove. In the valley below, a faint presence stirred. Apollo, radiant and poised, had noticed the subtle absence of his cattle, now wandering through hidden paths and secluded slopes. His attention, keen as ever, was drawn not only by the loss but by the quiet cunning evident in the movements themselves. There was no panic in the animals, only a strange, gentle guidance that hinted at a mind behind it, a subtle intelligence orchestrating their steps. Apollo's brow furrowed slightly, curiosity mingling with a quiet amusement. Whoever was responsible, he sensed, was clever indeed. Hermes crept carefully down the slope, dark eyes scanning the valley, small hands brushing moss and stone, body low and light. The playful thrill of yesterday's mischief still lingered in his mind, and now, with the knowledge of unseen observers, his movements took on a new subtlety. He paused near a small outcrop, peering toward the distant figure of Apollo, whose presence seemed almost luminous against the morning light. Hermes' gaze met the god's, and a flicker of recognition passed between them, a spark of intelligence, curiosity, and perhaps quiet challenge. Apollo approached slowly, the soft rustle of his robes blending with the faint murmur of the wind. The cattle, scattered yet calm, continued their grazing, guided invisibly by Hermes' gentle hands and careful nudges. The god's eyes softened slightly as he observed the child, noting the delicate balance of mischief and cleverness, of playful intelligence and small, deliberate movements. Hermes, in turn, felt a mixture of anticipation and subtle defiance, aware of the power across the valley yet confident in his own small abilities. The two figures regarded each other in silence, a quiet tension mingled with curiosity. Hermes, despite his small size, did not cower. His body shifted slightly, hands resting on the cool grass, eyes bright and attentive. He had learned, even in these earliest days, the value of observation, of patience, of understanding the reactions of others. Apollo, radiant and patient, sensed this. There was a cleverness in the child that demanded acknowledgement, a subtle cunning that could not be overlooked. Hermes' lips curved into a soft smile, delicate yet filled with the spark of mischief. He extended a tiny hand toward a small stone, nudging it gently across the ground. The movement was calculated, playful, and Apollo noticed. A faint laugh escaped him, gentle and musical, acknowledging the ingenuity in the child's actions. It was a quiet recognition, a first bridge between cleverness and authority, between the playful and the divine. The gods stepped closer, observing the scattered cattle and the careful paths they had followed. He knelt briefly, hands brushing the soft grass, and Hermes responded with a small shift of body, a gentle adjustment of posture, as if inviting observation without revealing the full extent of his cleverness. There was a delicate game unfolding, quiet, subtle, and profoundly intelligent. Each movement, each glance, carried meaning, testing limits, measuring reactions, discovering patterns. By midday, the first conversation between the child and the god began, not in words, for Hermes' voice was small and tentative, but in gestures, expressions, and the subtle communication of intelligence. Hermes nudged a calf gently, observing Apollo's reaction. Apollo smiled faintly, nodding, and Hermes laughed quietly, a musical sound like the ripple of water over smooth stones. The cattle continued their calm grazing, guided by invisible hands, the valley alive with the quiet, rhythmic sounds of wind, movement, and soft murmurs of life. Hermes' small hands explored, testing, touching the ground, adjusting stones, nudging twigs. Apollo, patient and attentive, observed each motion, noting the precision, the thoughtfulness, the innate cleverness of the child. There was no frustration, no harshness, only curiosity, gentle recognition, and the subtle challenge of one mind meeting another. Hermes, in turn, felt a quiet thrill, sensing the acknowledgement of his intelligence and the subtle encouragement to continue exploring, to continue experimenting. As afternoon deepened, a soft breeze stirred the valley, brushing leaves against each other, carrying the faint scent of pine and thyme. Hermes' movements became slightly bolder, guided not only by curiosity, but by the sense of a companion watching, a mind attuned to his own cleverness. He nudged a small fruit along the grass, watching it roll toward a stone, then laughed quietly as it bounced back. Apollo observed with amusement, noting the child's delight in cause and effect, in small, controlled mischief, in the gentle orchestration of a world that was otherwise calm and ordered. By evening, the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long, soft shadows across the slopes and valleys. Hermes led the last of the cattle through a hidden path, small hands guiding their steps with care and precision. Apollo followed at a respectful distance, observing without interference, acknowledging without judgment, the quiet brilliance of the child who had, in mere hours, demonstrated intelligence, patience, and playful cunning far beyond his years. When night fell, painting the sky in shades of deep indigo and violet, Hermes returned to his cave. His body was tired, tiny limbs curling into the soft mats, yet his eyes sparkled with the quiet thrill of the day's encounters. Maya watched him, brushing hair from his forehead, sensing that the child who had once slept quietly now carried a spark that would never dim. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, the stars shimmered faintly, and the soft rustle of the valley's grass echoed with memories of cleverness, playful mischief, and the gentle acknowledgement of intelligence recognized by God. The first light of dawn touched Mount Silene with soft amber and rose hues, spilling across the slopes and filtering through the branches of olive and pine trees. The air was cool, fragrant with mountain thyme and the faint scent of dew on grass. Hermes stirred in his small cave, stretching his tiny limbs, dark eyes bright with curiosity and thought. The events of yesterday lingered in his mind, the gentle thrill of herding the cattle, the quiet game with Apollo, and the subtle acknowledgement that his cleverness had not gone unnoticed. Hermes' fingers brushed over the smooth stones and moss near his cradle, touching textures with deliberate attention. He paused, considering, as if the mountain itself whispered ideas to him. There was a rhythm in the rustling leaves, a melody in the murmuring stream, and a subtle harmony in the wind's whisper through the pines. Hermes tilted his head, listening carefully, as though the sounds themselves were instructions waiting to be understood. A small twig lay nearby, fallen from a tree in the night. Hermes picked it up, tapping it lightly against a stone. The sound was soft yet musical, and his eyes brightened at the tiny discovery. One by one, he gathered pebbles, twigs, and a thin piece of hollow reed, arranging them on the smooth cave floor. He experimented gently, striking one twig against a pebble, then another, listening to the differing tones. A small smile curved his lips. He had discovered that simple objects, touched carefully, could produce sounds that sang with a quiet harmony. As the morning passed, Hermes' experiments grew more intricate. He bent the hollow reed, stretched thin strings from the vines he had found outside, and attached them to the reed, creating delicate tension. He plucked the strings carefully, one by one, listening as each produced a faint, melodious note. Each sound seemed to resonate with the quiet energy of the mountain, blending with the rustle of leaves, the distant murmur of the stream, and the gentle calls of birds. Hermes' tiny fingers moved deftly, adjusting the strings, tilting the reed, testing angles and pressure with a patience and focus beyond his hours. By midday, the first prototype of the lyre took shape in his small hands. He plucked each string carefully, discovering which combinations created the most harmonious sounds. The melody was simple, delicate, yet imbued with a soft, enchanting beauty. Hermes' eyes sparkled as he experimented, realizing that his cleverness could now extend beyond movement and mischief. It could create, inspire, and communicate in new ways. The music seemed to ripple gently across the cave, mingling with the sunlight and the scents of the mountain, creating a subtle magic of its own. Word of Hermes' cleverness and mischief had traveled quietly across Olympus. Apollo, radiant and patient, approached Mount Cyllene once more. His eyes, bright with curiosity, followed the soft sounds carried on the wind, the faint pluck of strings, delicate and melodic. He moved slowly, observing without intrusion, drawn by the music and the promise of another encounter with a child who had already shown such cleverness and subtle cunning. Hermes noticed the presence of the god as he worked, eyes lifting briefly, fingers pausing on the strings. There was no fear, only recognition, a spark of awareness that the music itself could speak. With careful, deliberate plucks, he experimented with rhythm and tone, creating a melody that danced softly through the cave. The notes were gentle yet full of life, a delicate expression of invention, intelligence, and playful creativity. Apollo watched quietly, a faint smile curving his lips. The music revealed not mischief alone, but a subtle understanding, a gift that went beyond simple cleverness. Hermes' small fingers moved deftly across the strings, creating patterns of sound that seemed to echo the gentle rhythm of the mountain itself. The air was alive with melody, blending with the rustle of leaves and the faint hum of the distant stream. Apollo's presence did not disturb Hermes. If anything, it encouraged him, a gentle acknowledgement of skill, a quiet invitation to continue experimenting and expressing. By afternoon, the lyre had taken form, its delicate strings producing a soft, harmonious song. Hermes plucked carefully, listening to the resonance, adjusting tension, discovering combinations that created subtle, enchanting effects. The melody was both playful and gentle, a reflection of his small body and quick mind, full of curiosity, precision, and delicate ingenuity. Every note carried a whisper of cleverness, a sense of playful joy, a hint of the adventures yet to unfold. Apollo stepped closer, observing the creation with quiet admiration. His hands rested lightly on the soft grass, and his eyes followed the tiny movements of Hermes' fingers. The god's presence was gentle, attentive, and encouraging, yet he offered no interference. Hermes, sensing the acknowledgement, allowed a small smile to curve his lips, tilting his head slightly as if inviting Apollo to listen more closely. The music, delicate and intricate, flowed like water over stones, soft and calming, yet full of energy and intelligence. Finally, the melody shifted, soft plucks moving into a sequence that seemed almost like words without sound. Hermes' small voice joined the strings, cooing softly, blending with the music. Apollo watched, and a quiet sense of reconciliation filled the space. There had been no harsh conflict, no anger, only cleverness, creativity, and the playful spirit of a child whose mind moved swiftly and freely. Apollo knelt, observing and listening, and Hermes continued his delicate music, each note a gentle conversation between them, full of intelligence, subtle acknowledgement, and the beginnings of a deep, mutual respect. As evening fell, painting the sky in shades of violet and deep amber, Hermes placed the lyre gently on the soft mats of the cave. His tiny hands rested lightly on its strings, and he smiled softly, feeling the satisfaction of creation. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying the faint melody across the slopes, mingling with the rustle of leaves, the soft murmur of the stream, and the distant calls of birds settling for the night. Apollo remained for a while, quiet and still, acknowledging the small brilliance of the child and the delicate harmony of his invention. By nightfall, the mountain was bathed in silver moonlight, stars shimmering softly above. Hermes lay curled in the cave, small limbs relaxed, chest rising and falling with gentle breaths. His mind was still alive with the music he had created, the cleverness he had exercised, and the subtle satisfaction of reconciliation with Apollo. Maya sat nearby, hand resting lightly on his shoulder, feeling the quiet pride and gentle energy radiating from her son. Hermes drifted into sleep with the soft tune of the lyre echoing faintly in his mind, a promise of more discoveries, more inventions, and the gentle unfolding of cleverness, creativity, and playful intelligence. The mountain night deepened, calm and serene, carrying with it the quiet anticipation of the adventures and discoveries that would continue to shape the child destined to become the swift and clever messenger of gods and mortals alike. The first light of morning stretched softly across the slopes of Mount Silene. Dew clung to the grass and the delicate petals of wildflowers, glistening like tiny jewels in the sunlight. Hermes stirred in his cave, small fingers brushing over the mats and stones around him. His dark eyes, bright with curiosity, flicked toward the cave's opening. Today felt different, as though the wind itself carried a gentle invitation to explore farther than ever before. Hermes stepped out, small feet pressing into the cool earth. The air was crisp, carrying the mingled scent of pine, thyme, and the faint sweetness of mountain flowers. Birds flitted overhead, their wings brushing the soft breeze, and a stream murmured quietly through the valley. Every sound and movement caught Hermes' attention. He paused often, pressing tiny palms against smooth stones, tracing the texture of bark, feeling the gentle pulse of life in the world around him. Beyond the familiar slopes, a narrow path led through a grove of olive trees. Hermes followed it carefully, crouching low to the earth, listening to the subtle rustle of leaves. The soft crunch of his steps on fallen twigs seemed louder than expected, yet he moved with deliberate care, aware of the delicate balance between exploration and observation. Each moment was a discovery. The way light fell across a patch of grass, the scent of earth warmed by the sun, the gentle rhythm of his own small heartbeat echoing the quiet world around him. A small fox appeared ahead, its coat glinting faintly in the morning sun. Hermes paused, crouching behind a low rock, dark eyes observing the animal's graceful movements. The fox sniffed the air, ears twitching, then moved along the path. Hermes smiled quietly, letting the creature pass, fascinated by the soft coordination of its movements. He noticed the gentle sway of its tail, the careful placement of its paws, the flicker of its attentive eyes. Every detail seemed significant, a lesson in subtlety, timing, and observation. Further along the path, Hermes discovered a cluster of smooth, round stones scattered near the stream. He picked them up, testing their weight, rolling them gently in his tiny hands. A soft laugh escaped him as he experimented with the stones, nudging them one by one into patterns, noticing how each bounced differently across the soft earth. The small game, simple yet precise, occupied him completely. Even in this quiet play, Hermes' mind was active, attentive, clever, already learning to move with thought and intention in the world beyond his cave. By late morning, Hermes' attention turned toward a gentle hill that sloped down into a secluded valley. Flowers swayed lightly in the breeze, and the air was filled with the faint hum of bees and the whisper of distant water. Hermes moved carefully, fingers brushing against the soft grass, toes sinking slightly into the cool earth. The valley seemed vast and alive, yet not intimidating. He crouched for a moment, inhaling deeply, feeling the gentle rhythm of the world around him, sensing the flow of life in both plants and animals. In the distance, a small group of birds alighted near a pond. Hermes watched quietly, noting the way their wings caught the sunlight, the delicate movement of their feathers, and the gentle ripples they created in the water. A soft smile curved his lips, and he reached for a small stick to nudge gently into the water. The splash was tiny, yet it fascinated him, creating patterns and reflections that shifted with the sunlight. Hermes giggled quietly, delighted by the small, controllable interaction with the world around him. The afternoon brought a new discovery. Hermes noticed a path that led beyond the valley, toward distant hills and winding streams. Tiny feet pressed into the earth as he began the careful journey, crouched and attentive, observing every texture and sound along the way. The soft breeze carried scents of pine, earth, and faint wildflowers, brushing gently against his cheeks. Every step seemed deliberate, a lesson in movement, patience, and quiet observation. Along the path, Hermes encountered a small group of goats grazing among the rocks. He watched their careful coordination, the gentle sway of their bodies as they moved across uneven terrain. With quiet curiosity, he nudged a tiny pebble, watching their reaction. One goat lifted its head and then returned to grazing, seemingly amused by the faint disturbance. Hermes' soft laughter mingled with the breeze, a musical sound that seemed to harmonize with the quiet world around him. By evening, Hermes had reached a hidden glade bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. Wildflowers painted the ground with gentle colors: lavender, pale yellow, soft pinks, and the air was alive with subtle scents and the hum of insects preparing for night. He pressed small hands into the grass, feeling each blade, each texture, learning the nuances of the world beneath him. The gentle rustle of leaves overhead, the quiet ripple of a nearby stream, and the faint calls of evening birds created a calming symphony that enveloped him completely. Hermes paused at the edge of the glade, small chest rising and falling with soft breaths. The wind brushed his hair gently, carrying the faint scents of earth, flowers, and pine. He lifted his face to the fading light, eyes bright with wonder, realizing that the world beyond Mount Silene was vast and full of subtle lessons, small adventures, and gentle discoveries. The valley hills and streams offered paths yet unexplored, creatures yet observed, and experiences that promised quiet joy and clever exploration. As twilight deepened, painting the sky with shades of violet and amber, Hermes began the careful journey back to his cave. Tiny hands pressed against the earth, toes tracing familiar textures, and each step was both a return and a reflection on the discoveries of the day. By the time he reached the entrance, the stars had begun to twinkle faintly, and the soft glow of moonlight brushed the slopes. Hermes curled into his small bed of mats, chest rising and falling gently. His mind replayed the sights, the sounds, the textures, and the gentle interactions he had observed. Even in sleep, there was a quiet hum of curiosity, a soft spark of cleverness, and the subtle thrill of discovery. Outside, the mountain night was calm, wind whispering through trees, the stars shimmering softly, and the world around him resting, just as Hermes rested with it. The sun rose slowly over the distant hills, casting a soft golden light across the valleys below Mount Silene. Dew clung to the grass, and the faint scent of earth, pine, and wildflowers mingled with the crisp morning air. Hermes stirred in his small cave, stretching tiny limbs and letting his fingers brush over the smooth stones and mats around him. His dark eyes gleamed with curiosity. Today he felt the pull of something new, something beyond the mountain paths and hidden glades he had explored before. Hermes stepped lightly onto the grass, toes pressing into the cool, damp earth. The wind carried the faint sounds of distant human activity, the rhythmic clatter of tools, the soft murmur of voices, the occasional low bleat of livestock. He crouched low, observing from the edge of the slopes, eyes bright and alert. His small hands brushed the moss and dirt beneath him, and he noticed every subtle movement in the distance, learning the patterns of humans as he had learned the patterns of animals and the mountain itself. A small village lay nestled in a gentle valley. Smoke rose faintly from hearths, curling into the sky. Children ran across the open fields, their laughter ringing lightly, carried by the breeze. Women moved slowly along paths, baskets balanced carefully on their heads, and men tended the flocks, guiding sheep and goats with practiced movements. Hermes watched quietly, crouched behind a low stone wall, fascinated by the coordination, the rhythm, the subtle interplay of sounds and gestures. Curiosity sparkled in his eyes. Hermes crept closer, tiny hands brushing grass, toes pressing gently into the soil. He paused near a well, observing a group of villagers drawing water. The movement of the buckets, the soft plop of water, and the delicate rhythm of their actions drew his attention. Hermes smiled softly, the thrill of observation filling him with quiet excitement. He wondered what small interventions might create gentle surprise or amusement without causing harm. A boy nearby bent to pick up a stray pebble, and Hermes' fingers itched to experiment. Carefully, he nudged a small stone across the path, watching the boy's reaction. The pebble rolled toward his feet, and the boy looked down, startled for only a moment before laughing softly at the tiny, unexpected movement. Hermes giggled quietly, a musical sound blending with a morning breeze. His first interaction with humans was gentle, subtle, and full of playful intelligence. Encouraged, Hermes moved closer, observing a small goat tied near the edge of the village. The goat bleated softly, tugging at its rope. Hermes' fingers brushed the coarse grass, then nudged a small stone toward the animal. The goat glanced at him, then shook its head, still calm and unafraid. Hermes laughed quietly, delighting in the small reaction, and began a careful, quiet game of observation, testing patterns and responses in humans and animals alike. By midday, Hermes had explored the edge of the village thoroughly. He crouched in the shade of an olive tree, watching children play, women gather herbs, and men lead flocks across fields. The air carried the scent of freshly turned soil, herbs, and warm bread baking in clay ovens. Each smell, each sound, each subtle movement fascinated him, a rich tapestry of life and activity that offered endless lessons. Hermes' mind absorbed every detail: the timing of steps, the sway of arms, the quiet responses of animals and humans alike. Hermes discovered a narrow path leading behind the village, winding toward a small grove where wildflowers and soft grasses grew thick. He moved carefully along the trail, crouching low to the ground, letting the soft rustle of leaves and the gentle hum of bees guide him. At the edge of the grove, he found a small stream, water sparkling in the sunlight. He dipped tiny fingers into the cool liquid, feeling its movement, listening to the gentle ripple as it flowed over stones and reeds. A small fish darted beneath his hand, and Hermes giggled softly, delighted by the subtle, fleeting interaction. Curiosity guided him further. Hermes noticed a villager attempting to lift a basket too heavy for one person. Quietly, he approached, hands poised delicately. With a gentle tug on the rope tied to the basket, he shifted it just enough to make the task easier without drawing attention to himself. The villager's face lit with surprise and relief, and though he could not see the child, the invisible assistance felt like a small miracle. Hermes smiled, satisfied by the subtle cleverness of his intervention. By afternoon, the village had begun its quiet rest. Children sat on the grass, picking flowers, and women paused in the shade, tending herbs and washing clothes in the stream. Hermes watched carefully, crouched near the edge of a field. He discovered how small, thoughtful actions could create gentle joy or laughter without disturbing the harmony of life around him. Every interaction, every subtle movement, became a lesson in observation, timing, and playful intelligence. As evening approached, the sky painted itself in shades of amber and violet. Hermes lingered near the village, small chest rising and falling with quiet breaths, eyes bright with wonder. The distant voices of villagers, the soft rustle of leaves, and the faint murmur of the stream formed a symphony of calm and gentle activity. He realized that even beyond Mount Silene, the world was full of patterns, reactions, and subtle possibilities. Nightfall brought a soft hush over the village. Lights flickered faintly from clay hearths, and the air carried the scent of evening herbs and warm soil. Hermes slipped quietly back toward Mount Silene, tiny feet moving over familiar slopes, fingers brushing grass and stone. He paused often, reflecting on the day's discoveries, the gentle interactions, and the quiet lessons he had learned about humans and the small ways cleverness could touch their lives. Curled into his small bed of mats, Hermes' eyes fluttered closed. The stars above shimmered softly, and the moon cast a gentle glow over the slopes and valleys. His mind replayed the sights, sounds, and subtle movements of the village, the laughter of children, the soft murmur of conversation, the quiet work of hands, and a gentle sense of pride and curiosity filled him. Tomorrow promised new journeys, small interventions, and continued discoveries in both the natural and human worlds. Outside, the mountain night was calm. The wind whispered through trees, the stream flowed softly over stones, and the animals of the slopes settled into their resting places. Hermes slept, small yet extraordinary, a clever mind already learning the balance between mischief, creativity, and gentle intelligence. The first light of morning spilled gently over Mount Silene, brushing the slopes in soft gold and rose. Dew glimmered on the grass, and the faint scent of pine, earth, and mountain flowers filled the air. Hermes stirred in his small cave, tiny limbs stretching, fingers brushing the mats and smooth stones around him. His dark eyes gleamed with quiet curiosity and anticipation, a gentle excitement bubbling within him. Today, Hermes felt the pull of something new. The wind carried faint voices, soft and distant, weaving together in patterns he did not yet fully understand. There was movement beyond the mountain paths, beyond the valleys he had explored, and Hermes, small yet clever, felt the urge to follow, to learn, to discover. With soft steps, he crept out of the cave, toes pressing into the cool earth, palms brushing moss and stone as he descended the familiar slope toward the valley below. In the distance, Apollo's glow had already begun to fade into the morning light. Hermes remembered the lyre, the gentle reconciliation, and the subtle acknowledgement of cleverness. That memory warmed him, a quiet reassurance that his actions, playful, thoughtful, and clever, could create connections across worlds, between gods and mortals. Today, he would explore the role he had not yet fully known: messenger. The first sign came in the form of a soft, rhythmic flutter, a group of doves, wings brushing the air in gentle patterns, carrying messages in the quiet language of movement. Hermes watched them carefully, crouched low on the slope, eyes following the delicate arcs of flight. He understood, in a way that came naturally, that movement could carry meaning, that small actions could communicate across distances. Fingers brushed the earth as he knelt, tracing subtle patterns in the soil, imagining messages moving softly like ripples across water. A villager in the valley below struggled to guide a stubborn goat toward the pen. Hermes observed quietly, considering the rhythm of the human's movements and the goat's reactions. With careful, deliberate steps, he approached, small hands nudging stones to guide the path, subtly moving the goat without startling it. The villager looked up in mild surprise, the tension easing as the animal complied. Hermes smiled quietly, satisfied. This small act, unseen by most, carried the same principles he would soon use as a messenger: observation, subtle influence, gentle guidance. Hermes wandered further into the valley, his movements soft and precise. The sun climbed higher, casting warm light across fields and streams. Birds called faintly from the trees, their wings brushing air in delicate rhythms. Hermes noticed patterns in their flight, the ways messages of movement and direction could be understood without words. He mirrored this subtly, his own small steps forming a silent language, creating order and understanding through presence and cleverness alone. By midday, Hermes had reached a narrow path leading to a small grove where humans gathered herbs and tended small flocks. He crouched low, observing the rhythm of their activity. One woman struggled to carry a heavy basket of flowers, and Hermes, hidden behind a low stone, nudged a small branch in her path. The branch shifted slightly, surprising her, and she paused, a faint laugh escaping. In that moment, Hermes' actions had carried both subtle messages and gentle amusement. It was then that Hermes noticed a larger figure approaching, a god quiet and patient, observing from the distance. Hermes recognized Apollo, radiant even in the diffuse light of morning. The god's eyes softened as he watched, noting the small interventions, the careful guidance, and the clever observation of the child. Hermes, crouched low, sensed the acknowledgement. His actions, though playful, were already taking on a role beyond mere curiosity, creating order, carrying intention, and influencing the world with subtle skill. Encouraged by the gentle presence, Hermes began experimenting further. He picked up a fallen leaf, pressing it lightly into the soil, leaving a faint pattern. He nudged pebbles, adjusted twigs, and shifted small streams of water to create paths that guided movement. Each subtle act was both playful and purposeful, a quiet rehearsal of the skills he would soon use as messenger of gods and humans alike. The valley, alive with scent, sound, and soft movement, became his laboratory. The afternoon sun deepened, casting long shadows and painting the fields in warm amber and soft green. Hermes crouched near a small stream, dipping his fingers into the cool water. Tiny ripples spread across the surface, carrying reflections of sunlight and movement. He studied them, tracing patterns in the shifting light, imagining how messages could travel silently, imperceptibly, yet with effect. Every gesture, every motion, became a lesson in subtle influence, precision, and timing. By evening, Hermes had traveled the edges of the valley, observing humans and animals, testing the effect of small, gentle actions. His dark eyes sparkled with satisfaction. He understood now that cleverness was not only in mischief or invention, but also in communication, in carrying intention across space and time, in influencing events with subtlety, care, and thoughtfulness. As twilight approached, the sky deepened into violet and gold, and Hermes returned to the slope of Mount Silene. Tiny feet pressed the soft earth, hands brushing moss and stone, and each step was quiet, deliberate, full of thought and awareness. The wind whispered gently through the trees, carrying faint scents of earth, flowers, and pine. The stars began to glimmer faintly, mirrored in the dark pools of the stream below. Hermes curled into his small bed of mats in the cave, chest rising and falling with gentle breaths. His mind replayed the day's discoveries, the patterns of humans and animals, the ripple of water, the subtle influence of small movements, the acknowledgement of Apollo. Even in sleep, His thoughts traced pathways, imagined messages, and planned experiments in clever communication. The morning sunlight spilled softly across Mount Silene, warming the slopes and scattering gentle shadows across the olive trees. The mountain air carried the faint scent of pine and dew-laden grass. Hermes stirred in his small cave, fingers brushing the mats and smooth stones around him. His dark eyes gleamed with curiosity and anticipation. Today, the wind seemed to carry a different weight, a faint vibration that spoke of tasks beyond the mountain paths and human valleys he had explored. Hermes stepped carefully onto the grass, tiny feet pressing into the cool earth. The morning breeze carried subtle sounds, the faint clatter of pebbles rolling down the slope, the distant murmur of a stream, and a soft rustle from the trees. He crouched low, listening closely, feeling the pulse of life beneath him. Today, he sensed, would call for a different kind of cleverness, a careful blend of observation, swiftness, and gentle intelligence. The first sign came as a whisper of movement in the clouds. A messenger bird, white-feathered and graceful, circled above, wings slicing the air with soft, rhythmic strokes. Hermes' eyes followed the bird closely. He understood instinctively that messages could travel in ways beyond voice and gesture, carried by wind, feather, and subtle patterns. Small hands brushed the earth as he crouched, tracing imagined lines of communication in the soil, feeling the rhythm of invisible currents. A figure approached along a hidden path, the soft, familiar radiance of Apollo. The god's presence was calm, deliberate, and quiet. Hermes lifted his gaze, recognizing both encouragement and expectation. Today, he would act not merely in playful exploration but in service, carrying a message beyond the boundaries of Mount Silene. His small chest rose and fell with measured breaths, mind alert, fingers twitching slightly in anticipation. Apollo's voice, gentle yet commanding, reached him across the slope. "Hermes," he said softly, "a message must travel from Olympus to a distant grove. Your speed, your careful observation, and your cleverness are needed." Hermes nodded, understanding the task not in words but in intention. The breeze carried a faint scent of divine olive oil, a reminder of Olympus above, and the faint warmth of the sun brushed his face. Every step, every breath, every subtle movement mattered. Hermes adjusted the small satchel he had fashioned from cloth, checking its contents carefully. A folded scroll, light as a feather, inscribed with delicate instructions for a minor but essential task. He moved with deliberate swiftness, toes pressing into the grass, fingers brushing moss and stone. The mountain slopes beneath him were familiar, each ridge, stone, and path memorized through careful observation. Hermes' mind mapped every detail, anticipating soft rustles of wind, the distant murmur of water, and the gentle reactions of creatures he passed. Every small action, every subtle adjustment, was measured to ensure the message traveled safely, quietly, without disturbance. As he descended toward the valley, Hermes encountered a small flock of sheep grazing in a meadow. He paused, observing their patterns, noting the delicate sway of heads and tails, the rhythm of movement. Gently, he nudged a stray twig, redirecting one wandering animal without startling the rest. The flock's calm continued uninterrupted, and Hermes allowed himself a quiet smile. The task of messenger work required patience, subtlety, and foresight, lessons he had already learned through playful experiments and careful observation. By midday, Hermes reached a narrow pass that wound between hills and streams, a hidden path known only to the creatures of the mountain. He crouched low, toes pressing the soft earth, and listened to the patterns of wind, the faint hum of insects, the rustle of leaves. Every subtle sound carried meaning. His mind traced lines of movement, paths for swiftness and discretion. He adjusted his steps carefully, moving with the quiet rhythm of the mountain itself. At the edge of the grove, sunlight filtered through the dense leaves, creating dappled patterns on the soft ground. Hermes paused briefly, tiny fingers brushing the grass, sensing the gentle pulse of life in the grove. Birds called softly from the branches, wings brushing the air in delicate arcs. The scroll in his satchel felt light, yet weighty with responsibility. Hermes moved carefully, placing it within a hollow of a tree as instructed, leaving a message for the intended recipient. A soft breeze carried the rustle of leaves and the faint fragrance of flowers, blending with the subtle motion of Hermes' movements. The task was complete, yet he lingered for a moment, observing the grove's calm, listening to the quiet harmonies of wind, water, and creatures. Every action, every gesture, every gentle step had been deliberate, measured, and precise. Hermes felt a quiet satisfaction, a sense of accomplishment that went beyond playful cleverness. As he began the return journey to Mount Silene, the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the slopes. Hermes moved with light, deliberate steps, tracing familiar paths while anticipating subtle shifts in terrain, wind, and movement. The valley below reflected golden hues, the stream murmured softly, and the trees swayed gently in the evening breeze. Each element seemed to acknowledge his passage, part of the rhythm of the world that Hermes had learned to navigate with careful intelligence and gentle skill. By twilight, Hermes returned to his small cave, body tired but mind alight with thought. His dark eyes reflected the fading light, and his tiny fingers brushed the mats with satisfaction. Maya watched quietly, sensing the pride and quiet confidence that radiated from her son. Hermes curled into his bed of mats, listening to the wind through the trees, the faint murmur of streams, and the soft rustle of leaves. Even in sleep, Hermes' mind traced patterns, paths, and gentle gestures, replaying the successful journey of the day. He had begun the work of messenger, carrying intention across distance with skill, subtlety, and cleverness. The mountain night deepened, stars shimmering softly, wind whispering through the trees, and the quiet world seemed to settle around him as Hermes rested, small yet extraordinary, already learning the rhythms and responsibilities that would shape him as the swift and clever messenger of gods and mortals alike. The morning light on Mount Silene was soft, brushing the slopes with a gentle glow. Hermes stirred from his small bed of mats, stretching tiny limbs and letting his fingers brush over smooth stones and the edges of the cave. His dark eyes gleamed with quiet anticipation. Today, the mountain seemed to hum with a different energy, a subtle pull that hinted at journeys beyond the familiar valleys and streams, a call from Olympus itself. Hermes stepped lightly onto the grass, feeling the cool dew beneath his toes. The air was fragrant with pine, thyme, and the faint sweetness of flowers. Each sound, each movement seemed amplified in the still morning. A bird flitted past, wings brushing the air, the distant murmur of a stream whispered over stones, and a gentle breeze swayed the olive branches above him. Every detail mattered, every rhythm was noted, and Hermes moved with deliberate attention, ready for what awaited beyond the mountain. The path up toward Olympus was familiar to him only in parts, but his small feet moved with certainty. He followed the subtle trails between trees and rocks, crouched low to the earth, listening to the quiet pulses of life around him. He paused briefly near a hidden spring, dipping fingers into cool water, feeling the gentle flow across his skin. The movement of water seemed to echo the rhythm of his thoughts, and Hermes smiled quietly, sensing that today would test both his cleverness and his awareness. As he ascended, a soft glow appeared ahead, a figure moving with deliberate grace. Hermes recognized the outline immediately. Athena, eyes bright with wisdom and calm, stepped lightly among the rocks and wildflowers. Hermes crouched behind a boulder, watching the goddess with fascination. She moved with purpose, each step measured, yet her eyes caught every detail of the world around her. Hermes sensed an invitation in the quiet of her presence, a test of observation, patience, and subtle cleverness. He stepped forward carefully, small hands brushing the moss and grass, and Athena noticed immediately. Her gaze softened, acknowledging the child's presence, but she did not speak at once. Hermes tilted his head, fingers twitching slightly as he prepared for their first interaction. He felt the weight of expectation and opportunity, the thrill of engaging with a god in ways that required both wit and gentle subtlety. Hermes approached slowly, crouched low, eyes alert. He offered a small gesture, a delicate bow of the head, a faint movement of his hand tracing the curve of a stone. Athena's lips curved faintly in acknowledgement, and Hermes allowed himself a soft smile. Their communication was quiet, subtle, carried entirely through gestures, expression, and the careful observation of each other's movements. The goddess stepped aside slightly, revealing a path that led to a glade bathed in golden sunlight. Hermes moved cautiously, small feet pressing into the soft earth, fingers brushing moss and fallen leaves. Birds flitted overhead, wings brushing the gentle breeze, and the faint murmur of a stream echoed softly through the grove. Hermes sensed that the glade was a place of learning, a space where observation, subtlety, and cleverness could be exercised freely. He discovered a small collection of objects left carefully on a flat stone, a feather, a tiny branch, and a smooth round stone. Hermes touched each with deliberate attention, noting textures, weight, and balance. He arranged them in patterns, testing how movement and placement change perception. Athena watched quietly, her eyes reflecting soft approval. Hermes understood, without words, that his cleverness, patience, and subtle adjustments were being noticed and acknowledged. By midday, Hermes had experimented with several arrangements, shifting pebbles, adjusting branches, and observing the movement of light and shadow across the glade. The air was alive with faint scents of flowers, pine, and earth, and the gentle rustle of leaves created a soft symphony that seemed to guide his hands. Every placement, every small motion, became a lesson in anticipation, timing, and observation, the same qualities that made him an ideal messenger. A faint rustle signaled the arrival of another figure. Hermes recognized Apollo's radiant presence, moving with quiet grace toward the glade. Hermes crouched low, observing the subtle sway of the god's robes and the gentle brightness in his eyes. Apollo's gaze met his briefly, carrying encouragement and curiosity, and Hermes allowed himself another small smile. Their connection, silent and intelligent, was reinforced by the presence of Athena nearby, a quiet acknowledgement that cleverness and careful attention were valued. The afternoon passed with Hermes moving among the objects, experimenting with patterns, observing light, and testing subtle arrangements. He nudged twigs, shifted pebbles, and adjusted feathers to see how shadows fell, how reflections danced in the sunlight. Athena and Apollo observed quietly, offering no interference but allowing Hermes to guide his own learning. Hermes' tiny chest rose and fell with soft, measured breaths, mind alert and delight sparkling in his eyes. By evening, the glade was bathed in amber and violet light. Hermes stepped back, small hands brushing the soft earth one last time. The patterns he had created seemed to hold a gentle harmony, quiet rhythm of intention and observation. Athena's gaze lingered with approval, and Apollo's eyes sparkled faintly with recognition of subtle skill. Hermes, tiny yet extraordinary, felt a quiet pride in his cleverness and careful attention. As night settled over the slopes of Mount Silene, Hermes returned to his small cave. His dark eyes reflected the fading glow of sunset, and his tiny fingers brushed the mats with satisfaction. Outside, the wind whispered through trees, stars twinkled faintly above, and the mountain exhaled a calm, gentle rhythm. Hermes curled into his bed of mats, chest rising and falling with quiet breaths, already replaying the subtle lessons of the day: observation, patience, cleverness, and quiet communication with the divine. The morning sun filtered softly through the olive trees, casting gentle patterns on the slopes of Mount Silene. Hermes stirred in his small cave, tiny fingers brushing over the mats and stones that made up his resting place. His dark eyes glimmered with curiosity and anticipation. Today, he sensed, would call for more than observation. It would require cleverness, subtlety, and a careful touch. Stepping lightly onto the dew-covered grass, Hermes felt the cool earth beneath his toes. The wind carried faint scents of pine, wildflowers, and the distant valley below. Each sound, the soft murmur of the stream, the rustle of leaves, the distant calls of birds, was noticed and considered. Hermes crouched low, tiny hands brushing the moss as he planned his route. The task ahead required careful attention to detail and gentle precision, and he was ready. A figure appeared along a hidden path, moving with soft purpose. Hermes recognized Apollo, radiant and deliberate. The god's presence carried both expectation and trust. Hermes' small chest rose and fell with quiet excitement. He approached carefully, crouched low, eyes bright with understanding. Apollo's gaze met his, and without words, Hermes felt the significance of the task. A message must be delivered to a mortal who had waited patiently for guidance, someone whose actions would affect the flow of events between gods and humans. Hermes crouched and accepted a small satchel from Apollo, light yet filled with intention. Within it was a folded scroll, carefully sealed, containing instructions to be delivered without disturbance. The mountain air seemed to hum gently as Hermes adjusted the satchel, feeling the weight, noting the soft rustle of the fabric, and sensing the importance of every small movement. He moved quickly yet quietly along familiar slopes, toes pressing into cool grass, fingers brushing moss and stone. The streams whispered as he passed, leaves rustled in the soft wind, and the faint sense of pine and earth mingled in his senses. Every sound, every detail mattered. Hermes' mind traced the pathways, anticipating obstacles and calculating the gentlest course of action. As he descended toward the distant valley, Hermes observed a small flock of goats grazing in the sunlight. One goat wandered near a loose stone. Hermes crouched, moving carefully, and nudged the pebble just enough to guide the animal back without startling the rest. He smiled quietly. This small action, subtle yet precise, reflected the skills required for his task: observation, gentle influence, and clever timing. By midday, Hermes reached the narrow pass that led to the mortal village. The path was alive with soft movement, a stream flowing over stones, birds calling faintly, the sway of olive trees in a breeze. Hermes moved cautiously, crouched low, adjusting his steps with delicate precision. Every detail mattered. Every subtle shift in the wind, earth, and sound influenced the success of his journey. At the edge of the village, Hermes paused behind a low stone wall, observing humans tending flocks, gathering herbs, and carrying baskets of bread. His dark eyes followed a young woman struggling to carry a small jar of water. Hermes' fingers itched to help. Carefully, he nudged a tiny stone beneath her path. The jar shifted slightly, easing her movement, and she looked around in mild surprise but smiled, unaware of the small hand that assisted her. Hermes crouched low and giggled softly, delighting in the invisible yet effective guidance he had provided. He approached the home of the mortal who awaited the message. The house was modest, framed by olive trees, smoke curling gently from a hearth. Hermes crouched at the threshold, tiny fingers brushing the doorframe, listening to the subtle creak of hinges and the faint scent of baking bread. He slid the scroll inside with care, placing it where the intended recipient would find it without disturbance. Every motion was deliberate, every step measured, every detail accounted for. Hermes lingered for a moment, observing the home and its surroundings. Birds called softly from the trees, the wind swayed branches with a gentle rhythm, and the faint murmur of a nearby stream completed the quiet symphony. His small chest rose and fell with satisfaction. The task was complete. Yet Hermes understood that subtlety, care, and cleverness were as important as speed and intelligence in every messenger's work. As the sun began its descent, painting the sky in soft amber and violet, Hermes retraced his path toward Mount Silene. Tiny feet pressed into the soft earth, fingers brushing moss and stone, every step deliberate and calm. The distant hum of the village, the rustle of leaves, and the faint ripple of streams accompanied him like a quiet song. By twilight, Hermes reached his small cave. He laid the satchel down and ran his fingers over the mats, feeling the cool stones beneath him. Maya watched silently, sensing the quiet pride and satisfaction radiating from her son. Hermes curled into his bed, chest rising and falling with soft, steady breaths. The stars began to shimmer faintly above, the moon casting gentle light over the slopes. Even as he drifted to sleep, Hermes' mind replayed the journey, the careful steps, subtle interventions, and the delivery of the message. Tomorrow promised new tasks, more journeys between gods and mortals, and further opportunities to practice his cleverness, precision, and gentle intelligence. The mountain night deepened, calm and serene, carrying the small but extraordinary messenger into rest and anticipation for the next adventure. The morning light filtered softly over Mount Silene, brushing the slopes with gold and amber. Hermes stretched on his mats, tiny fingers brushing smooth stones as he rose. His dark eyes sparkled with anticipation. Today would be a day unlike any other. A playful task awaited him, one sent by the gods themselves, requiring cleverness, quick thinking, and subtle action. The wind carried faint scents of pine and wildflowers. Birds flitted above, wings brushing the air in soft, rhythmic arcs. Hermes stepped lightly onto the dew-laden grass, toes pressing into the cool earth, listening closely to the quiet pulses of the mountain. Every sound, every rustle, every ripple of water mattered. Hermes crouched low, sensing the invisible threads that connected the slopes, the valleys, and the distant heavens. Athena appeared first, moving silently along a hidden path. Her eyes were calm but sharp, full of quiet amusement as they met Hermes. He nodded slightly, understanding that today's task would be delicate, requiring careful observation, clever solutions and gentle execution. A small satchel was placed in his hands. Inside were several tiny objects, a polished pebble, a feather, and a small folded cloth. They seemed ordinary, yet Hermes sensed their importance. The task was to deliver a message to another god in Olympus, but not in the usual manner. Instead, Hermes had to set up a subtle riddle, a puzzle of movement and timing that the recipient would recognize and understand, a test of cleverness and perception. The challenge made Hermes' chest lift with excitement. This was a game, a delicate balance of skill and thought. He moved with careful precision down the familiar slopes, toes pressing into soft grass, fingers brushing moss and stone. Each step was deliberate, each breath measured. The valley below was alive with faint sounds. A stream murmured quietly, leaves rustled softly in the breeze, and distant birds called in gentle larks. Hermes observed the rhythm of life, adjusting his movements to harmonize with it. At the edge of the valley, he paused near a grove where humans and animals moved gently through their day. Hermes crouched, small hands brushing the grass as he plotted the arrangement of the objects in his satchel. The pebble would rest on a small stone near the stream, the feather suspended lightly on a branch, and the folded cloth tucked into a hollow of a tree. Each placement was designed to catch the attention of the divine recipient while remaining subtle to all else. Hermes arranged the pebble first, rolling it carefully until it balanced perfectly atop a larger stone. He traced a soft pattern in the dirt, small lines leading toward the stream. The movement required delicate attention. One wrong nudge, one slight misplacement, and the subtle pattern might be lost. Hermes smiled quietly, satisfied as the pebble rested just as intended. The feather came next. Hermes climbed a low branch carefully, pressing toes into the bark, fingers steady on the wood. He fastened the feather to a tiny fork in the branch, angled so it swayed gently in the breeze. Light caught its edges, glinting faintly in the sun. The movement was slow, deliberate, a subtle signal of intention without disturbance. Hermes watched the feather sway, small chest rising with pride. Finally, the folded cloth went into the hollow of a nearby tree. Hermes adjusted it carefully, leaving only a slight edge visible, catching light just enough to hint at presence. He stepped back, crouched low, and surveyed the arrangement. Each object rested in quiet harmony, their positions forming a pattern of movement, shadow, and reflection that only the intended observer would fully perceive. The afternoon sunlight deepened, painting the grove with amber and gold. Hermes crouched nearby, observing the subtle interplay of light, wind, and shadow. Birds flitted overhead, leaves swayed gently, and the stream murmured softly over stones. Every element became part of the puzzle, part of the message, part of the careful rhythm Hermes had orchestrated. A soft rustle in the leaves signaled the arrival of the god who would receive the message. Hermes crouched lower, eyes bright with anticipation. The figure moved with grace, wings brushing the air, robes swaying gently. Hermes felt the quiet satisfaction of accomplishment as the god's eyes scanned the pattern. Recognition flickered in the divine gaze. A subtle smile curved the lips, and Hermes allowed himself a small, quiet laugh. His task had succeeded. Hermes lingered for a moment, watching how each placement interacted with the wind, sunlight, and surrounding nature. Tiny ripples formed in the stream, leaves danced with a gentle rhythm, and the feather swayed in perfect time. The arrangement was both playful and purposeful, clever yet gentle, an embodiment of Hermes' growing skill as messenger and trickster alike. As twilight descended, painting the sky in violet and amber, Hermes retraced his path to Mount Silene. Tiny feet pressed the soft earth, fingers brushing moss and stone, each step deliberate, thoughtful, and calm. The wind carried faint scents of pine and wildflowers, and the quiet murmur of streams accompanied him like a gentle lullaby. By nightfall, Hermes returned to his cave, satchel empty, small chest rising and falling with soft breaths. Maya watched silently, sensing pride and quiet confidence radiating from her son. Hermes curled into his bed of mats, dark eyes reflecting the starlight. Even in sleep, his mind traced the patterns he had created, replayed the subtle arrangements, and imagined new puzzles and playful tasks. The morning light poured gently over Mount Silene, brushing the slopes with soft gold. Hermes stirred on his mats, tiny fingers brushing the smooth stones beneath him. His dark eyes sparkled with anticipation. Today, a new task awaited him, one that promised not only cleverness but subtle problem-solving. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine, wildflowers, and cool earth. Hermes inhaled deeply, feeling the pulse of the mountain and the quiet rhythm of the world around him. He stepped lightly onto the dew-laden grass, toes pressing into the soft earth, fingers brushing moss as he moved toward the path that led to the valley below. The wind carried faint sounds, the rustle of leaves, the gentle murmur of a stream, and distant birds calling. Every detail mattered. Hermes crouched low, listening carefully, tracing the patterns of movement in the valley, anticipating challenges and opportunities alike. A soft glow appeared above the distant hills. Hermes recognized it immediately, Apollo, radiant as always, gliding along the air with quiet grace. His eyes met Hermes, carrying both encouragement and expectation. Hermes nodded slightly, tiny chest rising with excitement. Today's task would involve more than delivering a simple message. It required him to navigate subtle obstacles while keeping both gods and mortals in gentle harmony. Athena appeared soon after, stepping lightly along the hidden path. Her eyes were sharp yet calm, observing Hermes with quiet amusement. He crouched lower, small hands brushing the moss, sensing that this task would be both a test and an opportunity, a game of cleverness, observation, and timing. A small satchel was placed in his hands. Inside were several objects: a polished pebble, a slender feather, a folded cloth, and a delicate vine with tiny blossoms. Each item was to play a role in the task, requiring careful placement and thoughtful interaction with the environment. Hermes moved swiftly yet quietly, toes pressing into the cool grass, fingers brushing the soft earth. The valley below was alive with faint sounds and movements. A flock of goats wandered lazily near the stream. Leaves swayed gently in the breeze, and birds flitted overhead. Hermes crouched low, observing every motion, anticipating how his actions would interact with the environment and the subtle expectations of the gods. His first task was to guide a wayward goat back to its flock without alarming it. Hermes crouched behind a boulder, fingers brushing a pebble he intended to use as a gentle nudge. He rolled it carefully toward the goat, just enough to guide its steps. The animal paused, looked around briefly, then followed the path Hermes had created. A soft smile curved his lips. Every step had to be precise, subtle, and unnoticeable, a reflection of the cleverness required in his role as messenger. Next, Hermes placed the feather along the branch of a tree near the stream. The sunlight caught it in a gentle shimmer, and the soft breeze caused it to sway delicately. Hermes observed the interaction of light, shadow, and movement. The placement was both playful and purposeful, designed to convey a message without words. Every motion was deliberate. Every detail mattered. The folded cloth went into a hollow near the tree's base, tucked so that it caught the light just enough to hint at its presence. Hermes adjusted it carefully, then stepped back to observe how it interacted with a pebble, the feather, and the natural surroundings. The pattern formed a subtle signal, readable only by the intended observer, a god who would understand the clever arrangement and gentle thought behind it. The final piece, the delicate vine with tiny blossoms, required the most care. Hermes traced its stem along a low rock, weaving it around a pebble's path and curling it delicately toward the hollow. The blossoms caught the sunlight, glinting faintly, while the vine's curve created a subtle rhythm, guiding the eye and drawing attention without force. Hermes crouched low and watched, tiny chest rising with quiet pride. By midday, the arrangement was complete. Hermes crouched nearby, observing how sunlight, wind, and movement interacted with his placement. Birds called softly from the trees, leaves swayed gently, and the stream murmured over smooth stones. Everything harmonized quietly, forming a subtle puzzle that only the intended divine observer could perceive and interpret. A soft rustle indicated the arrival of the god who would receive the arrangement. Hermes crouched lower, eyes bright with anticipation. The figure moved with quiet grace, glancing over the pebble, feather, cloth, and vine. Recognition flickered in divine eyes. A subtle smile curved the lips, and Hermes allowed himself a small, delighted laugh. His cleverness and careful observation had succeeded once more. As evening approached, the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the slopes in violet and gold. Hermes retraced his path toward Mount Silene, tiny feet pressing the soft earth, fingers brushing moss and stones. The wind whispered through trees, the stream murmured gently, and birds flitted overhead. Every sound, every scent, every motion was a part of the rhythm he had learned to navigate. By nightfall, Hermes returned to his cave. He laid the now empty satchel down, tiny fingers brushing the mats, feeling satisfaction ripple through him. Maya watched quietly, sensing pride and quiet confidence radiating from her son. Hermes curled into his bed, dark eyes reflecting the starlight. Even in sleep, his mind replayed the delicate task, tracing patterns, observing interactions, and imagining new puzzles for tomorrow. The mountain night was calm. Stars shimmered faintly above, the wind whispered gently, and the world rested. Hermes, small yet extraordinary, drifted into quiet sleep, ready for the next clever challenge that awaited between gods, mortals, and the world around him. The morning air was crisp on Mount Silene, carrying the faint scent of pine, wildflowers, and cool earth. Hermes stirred from his small bed of mats, tiny fingers brushing smooth stones and edges of cloth. His dark eyes glimmered with curiosity and anticipation. Today, he sensed, would test his cleverness in a different way. Not a task from the gods directly, but a subtle problem in the mortal world that required his attention, wit, and delicate touch. He stepped lightly onto the dew-laden grass, toes pressing into the soft earth. Every sound carried significance. The gentle rustle of leaves, the distant murmur of a stream, and birds calling softly overhead. Hermes crouched low, letting his hands brush moss and soil, observing patterns in the slopes below. Movement in the valley had caught his eye. A small herd of goats had wandered from their pen, following a faint path into the forest's edge. Hermes descended carefully, tiny feet pressing into the cool earth, fingers tracing patterns on rocks and grass. The herd moved slowly, bleating softly as they navigated between stones and under branches. Hermes crouched behind a boulder, dark eyes observing the rhythm of their movements. He noted the stray goat that had fallen behind and the hesitant steps of a young kid weaving through tall grass. He approached quietly, small hands brushing grass and moss as he knelt. Hermes nudged a stray pebble along the path of the kid, guiding it gently toward the rest of the herd. The motion was subtle, unnoticed by the animals except for the faintest suggestion of direction. The young goat followed, careful yet unconsciously influenced, moving closer to the flock with each gentle nudge. Hermes smiled softly, crouched low, and adjusted his steps. He watched a goat hesitate near a small stream, unsure of the slippery stones. Tiny fingers brushed the surface, shifting a branch slightly so it created a narrow bridge. The goat tested it, steps cautious but steady, crossing safely. Hermes felt a quiet satisfaction. Every gentle intervention required attention, patience, and a careful balance between movement and observation. As he guided the herd, Hermes noticed a villager approaching along the path. A soft murmur of relief passed through the air as the person realized the goats were not lost entirely. Hermes crouched low, fingers brushing moss and stones, and allowed the villager to glimpse only part of the herd's path. The subtle work was invisible, yet the result spoke for itself. The villagers smiled, shaking their head in quiet wonder, unaware of the clever small figure who had orchestrated the herd's safe return. The afternoon sun bathed the slopes in gold, casting long, soft shadows across the valley. Hermes crouched low near a stone, observing the final goats as they returned to their pen. He nudged a stray pebble once more, guiding the last hesitant steps. The air carried faint sounds of bleating, rustling leaves, and flowing water. Every motion, every gentle adjustment, resonated quietly in harmony with the world around him. Once the herd was safely back in their pen, Hermes paused near the edge of the grove. His small hands brushed soft grass, feeling the delicate texture beneath his fingers. He observed the interplay of light, shadow, and movement across the stones and leaves. Birds flitted overhead, wings brushing the breeze, and the stream murmured softly. Hermes smiled quietly, chest rising with gentle pride. Subtle cleverness had restored order without alarm or disturbance. By evening, the valley glowed with warm amber tones. Hermes retraced his path toward Mount Silene, tiny feet pressing into moss and soft earth, fingers brushing stones and grass. The air was alive with faint scents of pine, wildflowers, and evening herbs. Every sound, every movement, every subtle ripple in the streams reminded Hermes of the harmony he had helped maintain. He returned to his small cave, chest rising and falling with measured breaths, fingers brushing over mats and stones. Maya watched silently, sensing the quiet pride emanating from her son. Hermes curled into his bed, dark eyes reflecting the first stars appearing above the mountain. Even in sleep, his mind replayed the careful guidance of a herd, the subtle interventions, and the gentle satisfaction of a task well done. The first light of dawn stretched across Mount Silene, brushing the slopes with a golden softness. Hermes stirred from his small bed of mats, fingers brushing the smooth stones that lined his cave floor. His dark eyes caught the subtle sparkle of morning dew on the grass outside, glimmering like tiny, quiet stars. Today, he felt, would call for all the cleverness, agility, and observation he had begun to master. The gods had entrusted him with a journey that bridged Olympus and the mortal world, a delicate task that required both precision and discretion. Hermes stepped carefully onto the grass, feeling the cool morning dew beneath his toes. The air was alive with scent and sound: pine resin, fresh herbs, faint wildflowers, and the crisp scent of early sun on earth. The distant murmur of a stream wove softly, with the rhythmic call of birds and the subtle rustling of leaves in a gentle breeze. Hermes crouched low, tiny hands brushing moss and soft earth, absorbing every detail. Each element of the landscape was a puzzle he needed to read, a rhythm to follow, a line of guidance for his journey. Above the slopes, a soft glow heralded Apollo's presence. The god's golden light shimmered in the morning air, his eyes meeting Hermes with quiet expectation. Hermes' chest lifted with excitement and a subtle, careful rhythm of breath. The task he carried was simple in words but rich in responsibility. A message had to reach a mortal, someone preparing a small offering for the gods. Hermes understood immediately that every step, every observation, every subtle intervention could affect the success of the task. Athena appeared soon after, her robes flowing lightly along a hidden path. Her calm gaze met Hermes' eyes, and he sensed her approval before she spoke. She handed him a satchel containing the scroll to deliver. Hermes opened it briefly, tracing the delicate folds with tiny fingers, imagining the mortal's eyes discovering it. He refolded it carefully, feeling the weight settle lightly against his shoulder. Every motion was deliberate, measured, and quiet, as though the wind itself would watch his actions. Hermes descended the mountain with careful swiftness. His small feet pressed into the soft, uneven grass, fingers brushing moss, stone, and tiny patches of flowers. The slopes were alive with subtle detail. A cluster of rabbits darted into a bush, startled by his movement yet unharmed. A small stream babbled over rounded stones, glinting in the early light. Birds flitted overhead, wings slicing the air with gentle arcs. Hermes adjusted each step to the rhythm of life around him, knowing that harmony and subtle influence mattered as much as speed. In a narrow pass, he found a small herd of goats wandering close to a steep ledge. Hermes crouched low, fingers brushing stones, and nudged a pebble gently to redirect the curious animals. One small goat hesitated, head swaying slightly, before following the gentle guidance back to safer ground. Hermes smiled softly, the subtle joy of quiet intervention echoing within him. He observed patterns, the sway of branches, the flow of the stream, and the scattered movements of humans tending fields below, and used them to guide his path with careful foresight. By midday, the sun poured fully across the valley, warming slopes and scattering long shadows across the earth. Hermes approached the mortal village, crouching low behind rocks and hedges. The scent of baking bread, fresh herbs, and smoke from hearths mingled with the aroma of wildflowers and soft grass. A young woman struggled with a basket of flowers. Another guided a small flock of chickens along a narrow path. Hermes moved quietly, nudging a stone here, a branch there, and subtly adjusting their path without them noticing. He felt a quiet, focused satisfaction, small acts of cleverness ensuring both the success of his mission and the harmony of the human world. He approached the house of the intended recipient. Smoke rose gently from the chimney, curling lazily into the warm midday air. Hermes crouched at the threshold, fingers brushing the doorframe, listening to the muffled rhythm of life inside. Carefully, he slid the scroll into a small hollow near the door, leaving it where the mortal would discover it without alarm. He lingered for a moment, observing sunlight glinting through windows, leaves swaying gently, and a soft breeze carrying the aroma of herbs and bread. His chest rose and fell with quiet pride, aware that every movement, however small, was part of the success of the divine task. The return journey was no less delicate. Hermes crouched and ran lightly over moss-covered stones, through sun-dappled clearings, past streams murmuring over rounded rocks. Tiny creatures crossed his path. A fox paused at the edge of a grove, a bird fluttered low across the trail, and small insects traced intricate patterns in the sunlight. Hermes adjusted his steps to avoid startling them, observing patterns and predicting movement with a quiet cleverness that had become second nature. As twilight approached, the sky turned shades of violet and amber. Hermes paused on a slope overlooking the valley below, letting the soft wind brush his hair and feeling the gentle pulse of the world around him. Streams murmured, leaves rustled, and distant humans moved quietly through evening tasks. Every sound, every detail, every subtle interaction reinforced the harmony he had maintained during the day. By nightfall, Hermes returned to his cave on Mount Silene. Tiny fingers brushed the mats, feeling the smooth stones beneath them. Maya watched silently, sensing the calm pride emanating from her son. Hermes curled into his small bed, dark eyes reflecting the first stars appearing above the mountain. Even in sleep, his mind replayed the journey, the careful steps, subtle interventions, and deliberate precision that ensured both gods and mortals had been served harmoniously. The wind whispered through trees, stars shimmered faintly, and streams murmured their gentle lullaby. Hermes, small yet extraordinary, drifted into quiet sleep, ready for the next challenge that would call upon his speed, cleverness, and careful observation across worlds. The sun rose gently over Mount Silene, spilling light across the slopes in soft ribbons of gold. Hermes stirred on his small bed of mats, tiny fingers brushing smooth stones and edges of cloth. His dark eyes sparkled with quiet anticipation. Today he would face his first true test of the messenger, not just carrying a message, but navigating challenges, timing, and the subtle judgments of both gods and mortals. Hermes stepped onto the dew-kissed grass, feeling the cool earth beneath his toes. The morning air carried faint scents of pine, wildflowers, and soft soil. Every rustle of leaves, murmur of streams, and distant call of birds seemed heightened in his awareness. Hermes crouched low, letting his fingers brush moss and stones, mapping the mountain paths in his mind. This journey would test swiftness, cleverness, and careful observation, and he wanted every detail accounted for. Athena appeared first, moving with deliberate grace along a hidden path. Her eyes met Hermes, calm but sharp with quiet approval. She handed him a small, tightly sealed satchel containing a scroll meant for Apollo. The instructions were delicate. The message needed to reach Apollo at a specific grove before the day's sun reached its highest point, and no mortal or wandering creature was to notice the delivery. Hermes accepted the satchel with tiny hands, feeling the light weight settle against his shoulder. Every motion was deliberate, measured, and precise. Hermes crouched low and began his descent. His small feet pressed into the soft, uneven grass, fingers brushing moss, stones, and clusters of wildflowers. The slopes were alive with subtle detail. A fox darted between trees, pausing briefly before disappearing. A stream bubbled over smooth stones, reflecting the morning sun. Birds flitted overhead, their wings slicing the air with delicate arcs. Hermes adjusted his pace to the natural rhythm around him, stepping carefully yet swiftly, attuned to every nuance of the mountain's life. At a narrow pass, he encountered a small herd of goats wandering close to a ledge. One curious animal edged too near the precipice. Hermes crouched, fingers brushing stones, and nudged a pebble just enough to redirect its path. The goat hesitated, glanced around, then returned to the safer ground. Hermes smiled softly, a quiet thrill at his subtle influence. Every small action mattered, and even these minor interventions reflected the cleverness required for his task. Further down the slope, Hermes observed a stream crossing. Smooth stones glimmered under the water, and the current shifted unpredictably. He crouched low, testing each step with careful fingers and toes. Tiny ripples lapped against his skin as he stepped carefully, calculating the safest and quickest path. A bird landed briefly on a stone near the water, watching him with quiet curiosity. Hermes held still for a moment, then continued, careful not to disturb the delicate balance of the grove. As the sun climbed higher, the valley below began to stir with mortal activity. Farmers tended fields, women carried baskets of herbs, and children ran along narrow paths. Hermes crouched low behind bushes, observing patterns and adjusting his course. A young girl stumbled while carrying a small bundle of flowers. Hermes shifted a pebble subtly, giving her a gentle nudge towards solid ground. She glanced around in mild surprise but smiled, unaware of the small hand that guided her. Hermes crouched low again, chest rising and falling with measured breaths, delighting in the quiet success of his cleverness. By midday, Hermes reached the grove where Apollo waited. The sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting soft patterns across the moss and stones. Hermes approached quietly, crouched low, tiny fingers brushing the grass. Birds called softly, and the gentle murmur of a stream provided a serene soundtrack. He slid the scroll into a small hollow in the tree, where Apollo could find it easily. Apollo's radiant eyes met Hermes, reflecting subtle recognition and appreciation. Hermes allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. The task had been completed swiftly, cleverly, and without disturbing the natural balance of the grove or its inhabitants. He crouched low, observing the light filtering through the leaves, the movement of shadows across mossy stones, and the gentle sway of the branches. Hermes lingered for a moment, absorbing the calm yet triumphant rhythm of the task. The sun continued its slow ascent, and he traced a path back up the slopes, crouched low, moving with deliberate care. Streams murmured softly, birds flitted across the sky, and distant leaves rustled in the warm breeze. Every sound and motion reinforced the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. By evening, Hermes returned to his small cave. Fingers brushed the mats, stones, and edges of cloth as he settled in. Maya watched silently, sensing the pride radiating from her son. Hermes curled into his bed, dark eyes reflecting the first stars appearing above Mount Silene. Even in sleep, he replayed the careful steps, the clever interventions, and the perfect timing that ensured the message reached its destination safely. The mountain night deepened. Stars shimmered faintly, wind whispered through the trees, and streams murmured a lullaby. Hermes, small yet extraordinary, drifted into calm sleep, ready for the next challenge, where speed, cleverness, and quiet observation would again guide him between gods, mortals, and the natural rhythms of the world. The first light of dawn brushed Mount Silene in gentle gold, spilling warmth across the slopes. Hermes stirred on his small bed of mats, tiny fingers brushing smooth stones and the edges of cloth. His dark eyes sparkled with anticipation. Today a new challenge awaited, a puzzle set by the gods themselves, one that would require cleverness, observation, and playful ingenuity. Hermes stepped lightly onto the dew-kissed grass, toes pressing into the cool earth. The air carried the soft scent of pine, wildflowers, and faint herbs. Every sound was amplified in his awareness: the rustle of leaves, the murmur of distant streams, and the calls of birds overhead. Hermes crouched low, fingers brushing moss and stones, observing patterns in the slopes and mapping a route for his task. The world seemed to hum with quiet expectation, and he felt its rhythm in his small chest, rising and falling with measured breaths. Athena appeared first, moving with her usual grace along a hidden path. Her eyes met Hermes with quiet amusement, hinting at the playful nature of the challenge. In her hands, she held a small, intricately folded box and a scroll. Hermes crouched low and accepted them carefully, feeling the light weight of the objects and the subtle importance of the task. The scroll contained instructions. He must deliver the box to Apollo, but only after arranging a series of subtle clues across the grove that would lead the god to the hidden object. Hermes' chest lifted with excitement. This was more than a simple delivery. It was a test of cleverness, timing, and careful observation. He crouched low, adjusting the satchel on his shoulder, and began descending the slopes of Mount Silene. Tiny feet pressed into the soft earth, fingers brushing moss and stone. The mountain was alive with detail. A fox paused to peer at him from behind a bush, a stream murmured over smooth stones, and birds flitted above, wings slicing the air with gentle precision. Hermes absorbed every movement, every rhythm, anticipating how each element would interact with his clever puzzle. The first clue was a pebble painted with faint, swirling patterns. Hermes rolled it carefully along a path near a stream, positioning it so sunlight glinted subtly off the designs. The movement was deliberate, invisible to all but the observant eye. It crouched and traced a small line in the dirt, guiding the gaze of the future observer. A bird landed briefly near the pebble, tilting its head curiously, and Hermes held still, letting the rhythm of nature complement his work. Next, he placed a feather along a low branch, its delicate curve catching the wind just enough to sway gently. Hermes adjusted it carefully, observing how sunlight, shadow, and breeze interacted. Every motion mattered, every detail contributed to the puzzle he was constructing. He crouched low and watched the feather move with the wind, satisfied at the subtle elegance of its placement. A folded cloth came next, tucked into a hollow near a tree trunk. Hermes adjusted it with small, careful fingers, leaving only a hint visible to catch light and draw attention. He observed how the sunlight shifted as it moved across the grove, ensuring that each clue harmonized with natural rhythms. Finally, he entwined a delicate vine with tiny blossoms along the path, curling it around stones and branches. The blossoms caught the sun's light and drew the eye, completing the subtle trail leading to the hidden box. Hermes paused for a moment, crouched low, fingers brushing the mossy earth. Streams murmured softly, leaves swayed gently, and birds called in arcs overhead. Every element, the pebble, feather, cloth, and vine, worked in quiet harmony, forming a pattern visible only to the observant. Hermes' chest rose with quiet pride. He understood the subtle balance of cleverness, timing, and observation needed to complete the task. By midday, Apollo arrived, radiant and deliberate, his eyes scanning the grove. Hermes crouched low, watching as the god's gaze traced the pebble, followed the feather, noticed the cloth, and finally found the vine, leading to the hidden box. Recognition sparkled in Apollo's eyes. A small smile curved his lips, and Hermes allowed himself a quiet laugh. The puzzle had worked perfectly, clever, playful, and harmonious with the natural rhythm of the grove. Hermes lingered, observing the sun moving across the trees, the gentle sway of leaves, and the soft murmur of the stream. Tiny feet pressed into the moss as he retraced his steps, crouched low, moving carefully back up the slopes. Birds flitted overhead, wind brushed pine needles, and the valley below settled into a quiet afternoon rhythm. Every sound, every motion reinforced the satisfaction of a clever task completed with subtle skill. By evening, Hermes returned to his small cave. Fingers brushed the mats and stones, feeling the cool surfaces beneath. Maya watched silently, sensing the quiet pride radiating from her son. Hermes curled into his bed, dark eyes reflecting the first stars appearing above Mount Silene. Even in sleep, his mind replayed the puzzle, the delicate placement of every clue, and the subtle interplay of wind, sunlight, and natural rhythm. The first light of dawn stretched across Mount Silene, spilling gold over the slopes and illuminating the dew-kissed grass. Hermes stirred from his small bed of mats, tiny fingers brushing smooth stones. His dark eyes glimmered with anticipation and quiet excitement. Today, the gods had entrusted him with a task that would test a new skill, swiftness. Not just movement, but speed with awareness, precision, and careful cleverness. Hermes stepped lightly onto the cool grass, feeling the delicate wetness beneath his toes. The air was crisp, scented faintly with pine, wildflowers, and the earthy fragrance of early morning. Every sound was amplified in his awareness. The rustle of leaves, the distant murmur of a stream, and the soft calls of birds beginning their day. Hermes crouched low, tiny fingers brushing moss and stones, letting his senses attune to every detail of the slopes and valleys below. Athena appeared first, moving along a hidden path with her usual quiet grace. Her eyes met Hermes with a mixture of amusement and approval. In her hands, she held a small satchel and a scroll containing the instructions for today's task. Hermes accepted them carefully, feeling the light weight settle against his shoulder. The message was simple in words but intricate in execution. He was to deliver it to a mortal village beyond the eastern hills, using speed and subtle cleverness to avoid disturbance and maintain harmony along the path. Hermes crouched low and began his descent down the slopes. Tiny feet pressed into the soft earth, fingers brushing moss, stones, and clusters of wildflowers. The slopes were alive with delicate detail. A fox darted between trees, pausing briefly to observe him. A stream babbled over smooth stones, reflecting the morning sun. Birds flitted overhead, wings slicing the air with gentle arcs. Hermes adjusted his pace to the rhythm of the world, mindful that speed alone was not enough. He needed precision. At a narrow pass, a herd of goats wandered too close to a precipice. Hermes crouched low, tiny fingers brushing stones, and nudged a pebble to redirect the largest goat. It hesitated, then stepped back safely. He smiled softly, chest rising with quiet pride. Every subtle intervention mattered. His swiftness must be balanced with careful observation. As he moved further down the slope, Hermes encountered a shallow stream crisscrossed with smooth stones. He crouched, testing each with his toes before leaping nimbly across, tiny hands steadying him against the larger stones. The water murmured below, reflecting sunlight like liquid gold. A bird landed briefly on a nearby rock, wings twitching, observing his precise movements. Hermes paused for a heartbeat, letting the rhythm of nature guide his steps, before continuing with careful swiftness. The valley below began to stir with mortal activity. Farmers tended fields, women carried baskets of herbs, and children ran along narrow paths. Hermes crouched low, observing their patterns. He adjusted his steps, slipping silently behind hedges and trees, nudging stones and branches ever so subtly to guide their paths without alarm. A young girl stumbled with a basket of flowers. Hermes nudged a small pebble to guide her onto firm ground. She smiled faintly, unaware of the tiny hand that had assisted her. By midday, the sun poured across the valley, warming the earth and casting long shadows. Hermes reached a small forest, dappled with sunlight filtering through leaves. He crouched low, tiny hands brushing moss and tree roots, and prepared for the next stage of his swiftness challenge. The path was narrow, winding, and full of hidden obstacles. Stones jutted from the earth, branches curled across trails, and streams intersected the winding track. Hermes' mind worked quickly, calculating each step, each leap, each subtle intervention to maintain balance while moving swiftly. Hermes leaped from stone to stone, fingers brushing bark to steady himself as he dodged low branches. The sun dappled the forest floor, illuminating soft ferns and tiny flowers. Streams murmured over rocks, and birds called softly from the treetops. Every sound and movement guided him, rhythm that he traced with tiny feet and delicate hands. His mind stayed alert, constantly adjusting, constantly observing, every motion precise yet flowing with speed. A small fox emerged from the underbrush, curious yet unafraid. Hermes crouched low, letting the fox cross his path safely. Tiny hands brushed moss as he adjusted his trajectory, leaping nimbly across the next stones without losing pace. He felt the pulse of the forest beneath his feet, the earth, the wind, the water, and every living creature in quiet harmony. His swiftness was no longer just movement. It was rhythm, awareness, and careful precision combined. Finally, Hermes emerged from the forest and saw the distant village bathed in sunlight. Smoke curled from hearths, carrying scents of baking bread and herbs. Birds flitted over rooftops, wings brushing the warm air. Hermes crouched low, scanning the patterns of human movement. Children running, women carrying baskets, farmers guiding livestock. Every step had to be measured. Speed alone could not disrupt the natural flow. He navigated swiftly, leaping over fences, ducking under branches, and sidestepping livestock with delicate adjustments. Tiny hands brushed stone walls and mossy edges as he traced the shortest, safest path to the intended recipient. Every motion was precise, careful, and balanced, yet executed with remarkable speed. His heart lifted with quiet exhilaration, chest rising and falling with measured breaths as he combined swiftness with cleverness. Hermes reached the house where the scroll was to be delivered. Smoke rose lazily from the chimney, and the scent of freshly baked bread and herbs filled the air. Crouching low, he slipped the scroll into a hollow by the door, leaving it where the mortal would find it easily and without disturbance. Hermes paused, watching sunlight glint across windows and leaves sway gently in the breeze. Recognition of his careful balance of speed and precision filled him with quiet pride. The return journey was no less intricate. Hermes crouched low, tiny feet pressing into earth and stone, fingers brushing moss and roots as he navigated slopes, streams, and forest paths. Birds called overhead, streams murmured beneath rocks, and the wind carried the scent of pine and flowers. Every motion required attention. A branch adjusted here, a stone nudged there, a tiny leap to avoid startling a fox. Hermes moved with deliberate swiftness, balancing speed, awareness, and cleverness in perfect harmony. By evening, the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the valley in violet and gold. Hermes returned to Mount Silene, tiny fingers brushing mats and stones as he settled into his small cave. Maya watched silently, sensing pride and quiet confidence emanating from her son. Hermes curled into his bed, dark eyes reflecting the first stars above the mountain. Even in sleep, he traced the steps of his swift journey, the careful adjustments, leaps, and interventions that had allowed him to move with speed and grace while preserving the harmony of mortal and natural worlds. The night deepened. Stars shimmered faintly, streams murmured gently, and the wind whispered softly through trees. Hermes, small yet extraordinary, drifted into quiet sleep, ready for the next challenge where cleverness, observation, and subtle intervention would guide him between gods, mortals, and the quiet rhythms of the world. The morning sun spilled softly across Mount Silene, brushing the slopes with gentle gold. Hermes stirred on his small bed of mats, fingers brushing the smooth stones beneath him. His dark eyes sparkled with quiet anticipation. Today promised something different, a playful test set by the gods themselves, a moment to show the cleverness, swiftness, and gentle wit he had cultivated through every journey and task. Athena appeared first, moving with her usual quiet grace along a hidden path. Her eyes twinkled, observing Hermes with amusement and approval. In her hands, she held a small satchel, light and sealed, containing a message intended for another god. Hermes accepted it with tiny fingers, feeling its weight settle gently on his shoulder. He understood the nature of this task immediately. It was not just delivery, but cleverness, subtlety, and a quiet display of wit. Hermes crouched low and descended the slopes of Mount Silene. The morning air was crisp and alive with faint scents of pine, wildflowers, and cool earth. Every sound, rustling leaves, murmuring streams, birds calling softly overhead, was amplified in his awareness. Hermes adjusted his pace, tiny feet pressing into soft moss and stone, letting the rhythm of the mountain guide him. The first part of the journey required precision. Hermes moved through a grove where sunlight filtered softly through branches. Streams murmured over smooth stones, and birds flitted overhead, wings slicing the air in delicate arcs. He crouched low, guiding small animals quietly, nudging stones and branches subtly to ensure their paths remained unharmed. A fox paused briefly to observe him, then disappeared into the underbrush. Hermes' chest lifted with quiet pride. Cleverness and care worked in harmony with speed and observation. At midday, Hermes reached the place where the other god waited. Apollo's radiant eyes met his, glinting with curiosity and amusement. Hermes crouched low, sliding the satchel near a stone where it would catch the light and attract subtle attention. But Hermes had more in mind, a gentle trick, a playful puzzle, crafted to test both observation and wit. He took a small feather from his satchel, rolling it along the edge of the stone. Sunlight caught its curve and began a slow, teasing drift across the ground. Hermes crouched behind a nearby tree, watching Apollo's gaze follow the movement. A subtle smile curved his lips. He then placed a polished pebble near a leaf, arranging it so that it seemed almost accidental, yet led the eye along a quiet path toward the hidden message. Apollo observed the subtle trail with quiet intrigue. Hermes crouched lower, adjusting a tiny branch and a delicate vine, letting the patterns of sunlight and shadow complete the playful puzzle. The god's eyes lit with recognition and amusement, and Hermes allowed himself a small, delighted laugh. Cleverness, precision, and gentle mischief had blended perfectly. Hermes lingered, crouched low, observing the dance of sunlight across leaves, the murmur of streams, and the soft wind brushing branches. His chest rose and fell with quiet satisfaction. The task was complete. The message had been delivered, and the playful puzzle had brought a gentle smile to a god's face. Every step, every motion, every subtle intervention reflected the growth he had achieved through countless journeys, clever solutions, and careful observation. The sun began its descent, casting long amber shadows across the grove. Hermes began his return journey, tiny feet pressing into soft moss, fingers brushing stones and roots. Birds called softly from the trees, streams murmured over rounded rocks, and the wind carried the faint scent of pine and flowers. Every motion was deliberate, precise, yet flowing with effortless grace. He had learned the rhythm of both mortal and divine worlds, navigating them with subtle cleverness and quiet joy. By evening, Hermes returned to his cave on Mount Silene. The sky glowed violet and gold, stars beginning to shimmer above. He brushed his fingers across the mats, feeling the smooth stones beneath, and settled into his bed. Maya watched silently, sensing the quiet pride emanating from her son. Hermes' dark eyes reflected the first stars, calm yet bright with satisfaction. Even in sleep, he traced the paths of his journeys, the careful guidance of animals, the clever arrangement of objects, the subtle interventions in mortal life, and the playful wit shared with the gods. Every adventure, every clever act, every journey of swiftness and observation had led to this quiet moment of fulfillment. Hermes had become more than a small, curious child on Mount Silene. He had become the messenger of the gods, clever, swift, and gentle, bridging divine and mortal worlds with skill, wit, and care. The night settled softly over Mount Silene. Streams murmured their lullaby, wind whispered through the trees, and stars shimmered faintly above the mountain. Hermes, small yet extraordinary, drifted into calm, deep sleep. He had mastered cleverness, swiftness, and observation, completing the cycle of his tasks and playful trials. Tomorrow and all days beyond would hold new journeys, but tonight, the messenger of the gods rested, serene and triumphant, ready for the quiet rhythm of sleep. And with the mountain bathed in starlight, the world around him whispered a gentle lullaby, carrying Hermes' cleverness, swiftness, and joy into the soft night.